I was up late one night in my new home, which I'd moved into about 2 years ago. After finishing some work, I was sitting quietly at my desk. Since childhood, I'd noticed shadow figures occasionally in my peripheral vision, but I'd always dismissed them as tricks of the eyes. These shadowy glimpses had become more frequent since moving into this house, especially in the kitchen. Strangely, they only appeared during the daytime, never at night. I hadn't thought much of this until this particular evening, when everything changed. On this particular night, it was late, around midnight, and the house was silent. My attention was absorbed in my work, the screen glowing gently in the darkened room. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure sitting beside me on the edge of my desk. Surprised but calm, I didn't turn immediately, thinking it would vanish as it always had before. However, this time felt different. It was unmistakably the silhouette of a small female, perhaps a young girl, or a petite woman. I saw no clear details, no face, no glowing eyes, only a dark, defined silhouette. She was swinging her feet gently, almost childishly, as if patiently waiting for me to acknowledge her. The swinging of her legs was rhythmic, peaceful even, but still unsettling. The moment stretched on silently, as if time itself had paused. After several moments, I softly turned my head, expecting her to disappear as my gaze met hers. Yet she remained there, perfectly still, a clear shadowy silhouette. Although I couldn't see her face clearly under the hooded outline, I distinctly felt it was female, maybe a young girl. The silence continued for nearly 10 seconds, and we stared directly at one another. I began to feel an overwhelming sense of invasion. Being a deeply private person, this felt intrusive, as if an uninvited guest had entered my most personal space. Abruptly, discomfort took hold of me, and I stood up sharply, flicking on the overhead light. Instantly, the figure was gone. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweaty. Trying to calm myself, I drank 2 cold glasses of water, pacing the room as I tried to process what had just occurred. After about 15 minutes, I managed to regain a bit of composure and return to my desk, convincing myself it had just been an illusion or a product of fatigue. As I sat back down, I felt uneasy but determined to resume my work. But only moments later, a subtle motion caught my eye again. This time, another figure appeared beside me, hooded and cloaked, leaning closely as though observing my screen or watching me intently. I could almost swear I felt a gentle chill on my shoulder, like the cool breath of something close by. My heart jumped again. Whirling around quickly, I stared at the figure directly. The shape dissolved immediately, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. Now thoroughly disturbed, my sense of privacy violated, I became acutely aware that these entities seemed to be aware of me. It wasn't random or accidental, it felt intentional. Perhaps they were amused or curious, but their motives were unclear. One thing I was certain of, they weren't there to harm me, though their presence was unsettling. Feeling unnerved, I decided to step away from my desk entirely. I turned off my computer and went into another room, hoping a change of scenery would calm my nerves. After sitting quietly for an hour, I went to the kitchen to grab a snack. As I moved down the hallway, I saw yet another figure dart swiftly alongside me, matching my pace step for step outside my room. This startled me so much that I froze in place, listening carefully. Silence again. Since that night, I haven't directly encountered these shadowy beings again. Interestingly, the fleeting peripheral glimpses in the kitchen ceased altogether. Perhaps their visit was meant as a form of goodbye, or perhaps they'd finally satisfied their curiosity about me. Even now, I think back and wonder about their true nature and intentions. They were always small, around 3 feet tall, roughly the height of a 7-year-old child. Were they spirits passing through, curious observers from another realm, or something else entirely? The experience left me with more questions than answers. Despite their harmless demeanor, that night left a lasting impression. It made me realize that not everything we see out of the corner of our eyes is simply imagination or tiredness. Sometimes, just sometimes, it could be a visitor quietly existing alongside us, observing and learning. Now, whenever I catch movement from the corner of my eye, I pause, wondering if perhaps they're back, still silently watching, waiting for me to acknowledge them again. When I was 10, my family moved into a house in Portsmouth, and that's when I first began noticing him, a mysterious presence I would later come to know all too well. At first, he was just a faint shadow, barely visible, standing silently at the foot of my bed. Even at that young age, I could sense his anger, a silent, simmering tension that radiated whenever he appeared. Though he scared me, his presence also inexplicably filled me with an overwhelming sense of anger and dread. One night, while lying awake in bed, I frowned directly at him, annoyed at his persistent staring. Almost immediately after, something crashed onto my head. A wooden bar from the bed frame had fallen out of nowhere. The pain was sharp, but more startling was the realization that the figure had vanished simultaneously. My parents, too, knew something wasn't right. They often heard his heavy, unmistakable footsteps pacing around my room, though they'd never directly seen him. My parents eventually separated, and for a time, I lived with my mother and younger brother. Yet, circumstances later brought me to move back in with my father. The entity followed. His presence was stronger and more invasive than ever. Though I rarely saw him clearly, I constantly felt watched, particularly in my bedroom. The intensity became so severe that I couldn't even change clothes comfortably unless completely covered, always conscious of an invisible pair of eyes observing every move. The phenomenon of footsteps grew louder and more frequent, as though the figure had grown restless. Although I never distinctly heard his voice, he started to manifest in more physical ways. I began hearing clear footsteps pacing around my room, heavy, unmistakable, and rhythmic. One afternoon, I finally saw him more distinctly for the first time. I was lying on the floor during a yoga session when I sensed someone leaning over me. Startled, I opened my eyes and saw a tall man with short, dark hair, his face obscured. Instantly, I sat upright, panicked, but no one was around me. Despite the room being empty, the sense of his presence was overpowering. At 17, my father and I had a falling out, and he kicked me out. I moved frequently after that, staying with various friends. Everywhere I stayed, the entity was always there. Each night, the disturbing sounds of heavy footsteps would haunt my sleep. It was as though he jumped from my bed whenever I got up, the mattress shifting and creaking under his invisible weight. In one shared apartment, a friend who knew nothing of my history once admitted to feeling watched, mentioning specifically that someone stood exactly where the entity always appeared near my bed. That confirmed it wasn't simply my imagination or anxiety, it was very real. Eventually, I reconnected with my mother after years apart, and moved back to Portsmouth. But the spirit remained with me. His presence intensified dramatically, to the point of frightening me again. Strange incidents began happening more frequently, heavy footsteps in empty rooms, taps and knocking at random hours, and the constant feeling of unease. During this time, my dog became unusually protective, barking and growling at nothing, especially at night. The TV inexplicably muted itself repeatedly, adding to the stress. One particular evening, the atmosphere felt especially oppressive. Shadows moved rapidly through the corners of my eyes, whispers echoed faintly, and cold gusts brushed against my skin despite all windows being sealed shut. Despite all this, I was never physically harmed. Fear eventually gave way to curiosity. Over the years, I consulted psychics and mediums, searching for answers. One psychic described him as an angry man with a military background, not malevolent but restless, perhaps trying to communicate or guard me from something unseen. This matched the constant feelings I had, unease, caution, but never direct harm. Yet I wanted clarity. I attempted meditation to connect with him. During one session, his form materialized clearer than ever before, stern, rigid, and unmistakably angry. Although he didn't speak, his presence conveyed an overwhelming emotional intensity. This vivid encounter frightened me profoundly, more than any previous encounter. Still, I sensed his intention wasn't malicious. He seemed bound by something beyond my understanding. To this day, his presence remains, though quieter. I still sense him, watching from corners, quietly observing my life unfold. I've come to accept his companionship, curious rather than fearful, yet forever wondering what ties him to me. Is he an ancestor, a forgotten guardian, or a lost soul trying to relay a message? Despite my efforts, his true intentions remain unclear. Perhaps one day I'll finally discover why he's attached himself to me, what message he carries, or what keeps him here. Until then, I continue living my life cautiously aware of this shadowy presence, comforted slightly by the knowledge that whatever he wants, he intends no harm. It was a late drive home at 3 a.m., something I had done countless times before. Living on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, I was familiar with the island's rich paranormal culture. I had never given much thought to the supernatural myself, though I always found the stories fascinating. The histories behind these legends could quiet even the most skeptical of listeners. But that night, I became part of one of those stories. As I entered my neighborhood, I noticed the streetlights were out due to ongoing electrical work. Parking was already difficult because our townhouse complex's lot was being refinished, forcing everyone to park on the street. I drove past the park, scanning for an open space, and just as I turned left, I slammed my foot on the brakes. Standing perfectly still in the middle of the road was a woman dressed in a torn white muumuu. At first, I thought I had nearly hit a pedestrian, my heart hammering in my chest. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was horribly wrong. Her dress was shredded near the hem, her long black hair hanging over her face like something out of a horror movie. A sudden chill settled over me. I could barely breathe. I had no choice but to complete my turn. Hesitant, I honked my horn lightly and inched my car forward, trying to avoid her. Just as I thought she would step aside, she jerked her head toward me and lunged at the car. Her face, dark, Polynesian, and twisted with rage, was covered in streaks of blood. A strangled gasp escaped my throat. Her movement had been so sudden, so unnatural. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I froze in terror. That's when I saw it. Clutched in her arms was a dirty baby doll. She halted just inches from my driver's side window, staring at me, her expression seething. Then, slowly, she began to back away. My body reacted before my mind could process the terror. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever she was. But as I checked my rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. She was right behind my car. I had sped forward, had turned a corner, had driven an entire length of a neighboring townhouse complex. Yet somehow, impossibly, she had already returned to her original spot, cradling the doll in the middle of the road. But now, she was different. She was no longer still. She was furious, thrashing the doll violently and screaming into the empty night. Panic consumed me. Each time I tried to circle back to find a way home, she was still there, waiting, pacing, growing angrier. It was as if she couldn't leave that street, trapped within its boundaries. The realization didn't comfort me. It only terrified me further. At this point, I was desperate. I needed to park and walk home, but how could I? The thought of leaving my car and stepping into the open was impossible to entertain. Then, a thought struck me. Just 2 minutes away was our local police station. Without hesitation, I drove straight there. I explained, as best as I could, what I had seen. The officer didn't dismiss me. Whether out of genuine belief or just professionalism, they agreed to follow me home. I led the way, heart pounding. But as we arrived back in my neighborhood, something strange had happened. The woman was gone. And every single streetlight was back on. There was no trace of her. No sound, no movement, nothing. I could barely process what had happened. I thanked the officer profusely, apologized for the trouble, and hurried inside my house, locking the doors behind me. The next day, my neighbor, who had known my mother for over 30 years, texted me, asking why I had been driving so erratically and honking my horn. She had seen my car swerving between lanes and stopping suddenly before speeding off. She assumed I had been distracted, texting perhaps, and hadn't thought much of it at the time. I told her what had happened. Being deeply religious, she simply responded, Go home and pray. That was the first time in years I actually considered doing just that. But the nightmare didn't end there. Ever since that night, something changed. Whenever I napped on my living room couch while home alone, I would wake up paralyzed, staring up at the second floor, where a shadowy, veiled woman in black would dart in and out of the master bedroom, laughing. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find her standing at the railing, watching me. And sometimes, I'd open my eyes to see her crouched over me, her face inches from mine. As I came to full consciousness, she would try to change, morphing into the form of my mother. But the moment I truly woke, her illusion would fail, and she would revert to her horrifying true self before vanishing. Then, a few days after my encounter with the woman in white, something else happened. I was the victim of a head-on collision, a hit-and-run. The other driver had been drunk, speeding at 4 p.m. in a massive Ford F-250. My small Honda was crushed, totaled beyond repair. If I had been just a few inches further into the intersection, I wouldn't be alive today to tell this story. That's the thing that haunts me the most. Was she a warning? A harbinger of death that I narrowly escaped? Or was she something worse, something that wanted me to die that day? I don't know. But every now and then, I still wonder about that night. How great is it that we are alive today? It only makes me wonder what truly awaits us on the other side. 7 years ago, my sister P was struggling more than most. A single mother of two, her life had taken a difficult turn when she was diagnosed with a debilitating illness, one that classified her as 100% disabled. This was devastating for her, not just physically, but emotionally. She had always been a workaholic, someone who thrived in productivity, but now she was confined mostly to her room, unable to do the things she once loved. Her children, too young to understand why their mother couldn't give them the attention they needed, reacted by acting out. Over time, their behavior became selfish and self-serving, though, thankfully, my niece had started to turn her life around. To make life easier for all of us, my mother and I decided to find a house big enough for our entire family to live together. P's condition required close care, and it was becoming exhausting to rush over to her place every time she had an episode. Moving in together just made sense. We found the perfect place, a large house with enough space for everyone. The basement had a partially finished area that I converted into a one-bedroom apartment, complete with its own full bathroom. My mother and sister took the upstairs bedrooms, while my niece and nephew claimed the two main floor rooms. It was a Cape-style house, similar to an old one we had lived in before, but instead of eerie closets, this house had a slanted ceiling and a crawl space crammed full of my mother's collection of things she refused to throw away. At first, living in the basement was an adjustment, mostly because the only access to the laundry room was through my space. Until I closed off my area with a door, family members had to walk through my makeshift kitchen to do their laundry. It was inconvenient, but not the biggest issue, at least, not compared to what happened a few weeks later. One night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a bright light coming from the laundry room. Groggy, I assumed someone had decided to do laundry at a rude hour. Annoyed, I lifted my head to see who it was. That's when I saw him. A man stood in my kitchen, bathed in an almost ethereal glow. He had curly, light brown hair and wore a toga-like garment tied at the waist with a simple rope. He wasn't doing anything, just leaning casually against my kitchen sink, his legs crossed, as if mid-conversation with someone I couldn't see. He was smiling directly at me, his expression kind but unsettling in its familiarity. Before I could react, the light dimmed, and his figure slowly faded until only darkness remained. I turned on the TV, letting the noise soothe me back to sleep, but the memory of his presence lingered. A few nights later, I experienced something even stranger. I was half asleep when I heard a voice, someone calling my name. The voice belonged to a girl I had known in 3rd grade. Slowly, I opened my eyes and stared up at the ceiling. My breath caught in my throat. There, protruding from the ceiling, was an elbow. It wasn't just a shadow or an illusion. It was a fully formed arm, extending from the ceiling down to half of a forearm. I blinked rapidly, trying to process what I was seeing. Before I could move, something even more bizarre happened. A swarm of spiders scurried across the ceiling, crawling toward the elbow. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the arm was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I was completely awake. No medication, no hallucinations. Just reality bending in a way I couldn't explain. After that, I moved upstairs when my mother decided to take one of the main floor bedrooms. I took over the 2 upstairs rooms, one as a bedroom and the other as a small living area. The change in location didn't matter though. He still found me. This time, it was different. I was lying in bed when I heard my father's voice calling my name. Instinctively, I opened my eyes. Standing over, and partially through, me was the curly-haired man from before. This time, there was no glowing light, no distant gaze. He was close, too close, looking down at me with the same gentle smile. I didn't know what possessed me, but I sat straight up, bringing my face inches from his. He didn't flinch. He didn't fade. He just stood there, watching me. A single chuckle escaped his lips, a soft, amused "Ha!" Then, as if satisfied, he turned away. He walked toward my bedroom door, stopped for a moment to glance back, and then disappeared completely. That was 2 years ago. I haven't seen him since. The spiders, though? The spiders are still here. I see them all the time, darting across the ceiling. Some are massive, others are normal-sized, but they always scurry into the walls and vanish. I've been told that spiders are a sign of good luck, so I don't bother them. They don't bother me either. Nothing in this house has ever felt malicious. No cold drafts, no sinister intentions, just strange, inexplicable moments. But that doesn't make it any less unsettling to wake up and find someone standing inside of you. It's a bizarre mix of emotions, warmth, safety, fear, and alarm all tangled together. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he had a message. Or maybe, some things are just meant to remain a mystery. "7 years ago, I had one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, an encounter with something I still can't explain. As a child, I was always afraid of monsters lurking under my bed, convinced that something waited in the darkness to pull me away from my mother. Though those fears had never materialized into anything real, one night proved to me that there was indeed something out there, something far beyond my understanding. At that time, my family was living in Arunachal Pradesh, and we had traveled to Assam for my maternal uncle's wedding. The family had recently moved to a more isolated area, far from the village, where only 4 houses stood. One belonged to my maternal aunt and her in-laws, and the others were scattered sparsely, creating an eerie silence in the surroundings. The night before the wedding, the entire household was alive with excitement, filled with chatter, music, and bright lights. As a child, I was thrilled to play with my cousins all day, running around without a care. But by nightfall, exhaustion set in, and one by one, my cousins fell asleep early, around 8 p.m., at my aunt's house, about 30 steps away from my uncle's home. The house itself was still under construction, a small hut with a tin roof that provided little protection from the sounds of the night. Though I wanted to stay up with the others, my mother insisted that I go to bed. I agreed reluctantly and lay down on a separate bed while my 3 cousins slept in another, huddled together. My mother sat by me until I drifted off, and for a while, all was peaceful. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why, but then I heard it, a strange, painful groaning coming from outside. It sounded distant at first, but as I listened more intently, the uneasiness grew inside me. We were in an isolated place, surrounded by only a few houses, and almost everyone was attending the wedding. So who, or what, was making that sound? The groaning stopped for a brief moment, and I felt myself exhale in relief. But then it returned, this time accompanied by the distinct sound of heavy boots crunching against the earth. My blood turned cold. Then came another sound, like someone pumping water from an old well, the metallic jingling of chains, followed again by that awful groaning. The sounds were relentless, each one more unsettling than the last. Paralyzed in fear, I wanted to scream, but something held me back. What if it knew I was awake? What if it came for me? It was December, yet I was drenched in sweat. My cousins remained in deep sleep, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding around me. I decided that I needed to move, to get to their bed where I might feel safer. But to do that, I had to cross 7 steps to the other side of the room, and pass the door that led outside. Summoning all the courage I had, I bolted from my bed, running as fast as I could to where my cousins lay. I dove in beside them, heart pounding, eyes squeezed shut as I prayed for the noises to stop. But they didn't. If anything, they grew louder, more desperate, more unnatural. Somehow, at some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. When morning came, I told my family what had happened, but no one believed me. They dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination. But I knew what I had heard. And I knew it was real. That night was the wedding itself, and by then, most of the guests, including the groom's friends and relatives, had gone to the bride's home for the rituals, leaving behind only a few elderly women and us children. We didn't mind, though. We were still reveling in the celebrations, playing and dancing to the music. Then one of my cousins suggested that we get some more music discs from their house, which was a short walk away. At first I hesitated. It was late, 11:30 p.m., and after what had happened the night before, the thought of walking through the dark unsettled me. But the others teased me, joking that the ghost from last night must have taken a liking to me and wanted to dance at the wedding. I laughed nervously, but against my better judgment, I agreed to go. As we made our way down the path, we suddenly stopped dead in our tracks. Just a few steps ahead, illuminated faintly by the moonlight, was a wispy, smoke-like figure. At first, we couldn't make out what it was. Then, as our eyes adjusted, we saw it clearly, 2 figures, draped in white dodas, standing eerily still. I, being the eldest, instinctively stopped the younger ones from moving forward. For a few moments, we stood frozen, staring, unsure if our minds were playing tricks on us. But then they moved. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, they began advancing toward us. Their movements were unnatural, gliding rather than walking, their forms shifting in the dim light. Panic surged through us. Without another thought, we turned and ran as fast as our legs could carry us, back to the wedding venue. Our faces said everything. No words were needed. Seeing our terror, the elders called for the imam, who arrived shortly after. He gave us water to drink, recited prayers, and tied a tabiz around our necks. Later, he explained that spirits often reveal themselves to certain people more easily than others. He told me that because I was a Libra, I was more susceptible to seeing things that others might not. He suggested that whatever had been lurking near the house the night before had been trying to get my attention. Even now, I think back to that night and the way the figures moved toward us. I don't know what they were, or why they appeared. But I do know that, to this day, the memory of that haunting encounter remains as vivid as ever. Some things, no matter how much time passes, never truly fade. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Ever since I was a child, I've shared a unique relationship with one particular ghost, a guardian of sorts who's always lingered around me. Unlike other spirits I've encountered, communicating with him has always been clearer, almost like talking with a trusted friend. Even when our interactions were puzzling at first, they usually made sense eventually. Our relationship has evolved over the years, becoming deeper and more nuanced. When I was very young, perhaps around 4 or 5, I distinctly remember hearing his voice whispered directly into my ear. His tone, his accent, these details remain vivid in my mind, although the actual words he spoke have long since faded. What I do remember clearly is the confusion I felt at the time, as if I couldn't grasp what he was trying to convey. By the time I was around 5 years old, the direct whispering stopped, replaced only occasionally by brief conversations and dreams. Those dreams, from my early 20s until today, were sparse. When he spoke in dreams, his voice was always calm, measured, and deliberate, as if he wanted to ensure I understood clearly because he would not repeat himself. Then came a night unlike any other. It was around 11, and my husband and I were winding down, preparing to head to bed. The house was quiet, peaceful, devoid of any background noise like television or music. As I walked toward the kitchen and my husband lingered in the hallway, a voice suddenly spoke out loud and clear from inside the kitchen, just as I stepped into the room. I froze mid-step, my heart skipping. My husband quickly joined me, equally startled, and we stood staring at each other in disbelief. The voice had said something short, which at first we thought sounded like, "Is surrounding." We stood perfectly still, waiting anxiously for more words, but nothing else followed. What truly amazed and excited me was the fact that the voice had spoken out loud, in the physical room, rather than in my ear or within a dream. Best of all, my husband had heard it too, proving I wasn't imagining things. We stood there, exchanging glances filled with astonishment and excitement. My husband finally broke our stunned silence, cautiously asking, "Was that?" Without words, I slowly nodded, affirming his suspicion. With newfound courage, I began softly asking aloud, "What did you say?" hoping to elicit another response. Predictably, our guardian's spirit remained silent. After discussing it further, we realized he might have actually said, "It's a brownie." A brownie is a friendly house spirit from folklore, often associated with helping around the home. The idea made perfect sense in the context of recent events. For the past week, our house had experienced an uptick in small, harmless disturbances. Doors had begun creaking open and shut when we weren't around, a saucepan lid occasionally rattled loudly, startling us both, and even bathroom cabinets seemed to close on their own. None of these occurrences felt threatening, just curious and a bit mischievous. In the past, whenever I asked our guardian ghost to investigate any strange activities around the house, things would usually stop immediately. But this time, even after asking, the activities continued uninterrupted. I wondered if our guardian was taking his time, carefully observing whatever was going on. My guardian spirit usually communicates with me by appearing briefly as a faint, shadowy figure just as I enter a room. Over the years, I've learned to interpret these fleeting glimpses. When I see him after asking for assistance, it's his silent way of reassuring me, telling me that he's taken care of whatever issue was at hand. However, if he appears without any prior interaction, I've learned to be cautious, as it often signals that something unusual is happening or about to happen. Seeing him clearly, solidly, was rare and always startled me, no matter how accustomed I'd become to his presence. But a gentle shadow, just out of sight, was something I could manage comfortably. Now, knowing we might be hosting a brownie made me both intrigued and amused. Why had it suddenly become active? Nothing major had changed, except perhaps that we'd begun looking after our godson weekly, who was now about 10 months old. Could his innocent presence be attracting or encouraging this spirit to interact more boldly? Or maybe, just maybe, the guardian ghost hadn't intended for us to overhear his observation at all. That night had been thrilling, a rare moment of direct, clear communication with a spirit I had known almost my entire life. Though I doubted this would become a regular occurrence, hearing his voice in such a real, tangible way was undeniably remarkable. As for our new brownie companion, I felt a sense of comfort and curiosity. Perhaps our guardian ghost was letting us know there was nothing to fear. Whether guardian or brownie, these spirits seemed content to watch over us, occasionally reminding us that we're never truly alone. In 2008, something unforgettable happened to our family. A Japanese man, accompanied by some locals, approached my father asking permission to dig beneath the old house lot that belonged to his parents. They claimed someone had tipped them off that gold might be hidden there, possibly buried during World War II. At first, my father was skeptical and hesitant, dismissing the idea entirely. However, their persistence eventually convinced him, especially after they promised that any discovered gold would be shared. When they began digging, they initially uncovered several intriguing items, some old $1 coins, aged military bombs, gold pieces shaped like garlic cloves topped with diamonds, and even small golden Buddha statues. The process seemed smooth, and everyone was hopeful. Things took a strange turn, however, when my younger brother began experiencing health problems. At the time, I was away at college and only returned home on weekends, unaware of the changes taking place. My mother eventually told me what was happening. My brother had stopped eating normally, becoming frequently ill. During meals, particularly lunchtime, he would become distressed, start crying, and point anxiously outside the window. When asked, my brother described seeing an elderly woman passing by the same spot every day. He depicted her as short, with long, grayish hair, wearing a white dress with detailed embroidery. Yet he never saw her face, which seemed hidden or obscured. This apparition deeply frightened him, making him dread mealtimes because that was when she consistently appeared. One particular Friday evening, when I arrived home from college, everything initially seemed fine. My father was outside, my mother was inside watching TV, and my brother and I were chatting casually, facing each other. All doors and windows in the house were securely closed, although I can't recall why we had shut them. While talking, I suddenly felt an unsettling chill crawl up my spine, accompanied by goosebumps. It felt as though a cold breeze was blowing against my back, which was impossible given everything was closed tightly. My heart began racing with anxiety as I sensed a presence directly behind me. Without me saying anything, my brother exclaimed quietly, "8." I immediately gestured for him not to speak further, noticing his eyes widen in fear. He covered his mouth with his hands, clearly shaken. Trying to remain calm, I held his knee firmly, attempting to assure him silently that I was there and that he was safe. We locked eyes, both of us waiting nervously until I felt the chilling presence behind me fade away. Once the sensation passed, I quickly called out to our mother. Alarmed by our urgency, she rushed outside without even knowing what had happened. Her sudden departure left me and my brother alone inside, and oddly enough, her dramatic reaction briefly broke the tense atmosphere. We burst into laughter, partly from relief and partly from how startled she had become. Needing fresh air and a distraction, my brother and I decided to go outside and buy some food. On the way, my brother confided in me, revealing that he'd seen the old woman behind me. Shockingly, this was the first time she had appeared inside our house, and yet again, he hadn't seen her face. It fascinated him how clearly he could see her while I could sense her presence without visual confirmation. Outwardly, we joked about the incident, but internally I was deeply frightened. The fact that the apparition had entered our home worried me deeply. I couldn't shake the feeling that my presence might have somehow drawn her in. After this alarming encounter, my father decided to halt the digging operations. Elders in our community had warned him of the dangers involved, cautioning that continued digging might mean losing my brother. Once the digging stopped, the old lady's appearances ceased entirely. My brother returned to normal. His appetite and health quickly improved, and he never saw the woman again. To this day, the memory remains vivid and haunting. While the gold and treasures seemed alluring at first, the experience taught us that some things are better left undiscovered. Whatever presence we had awakened clearly had intentions beyond our understanding, reminding us to respect the boundaries between our world and the unseen. It happened in Las Piñas, at the house of an old friend I hadn't seen in years. She was celebrating her birthday, and a few of my college friends and I decided to visit. It was a wonderful evening filled with laughter, food, and reminiscing about the past. As the night went on, my friends had to leave early since they had a long drive home. I, however, chose to stay behind. It had been too long since my friend and I had spent time together, and I wanted to catch up properly. We stayed up for hours, talking about everything we had missed in each other's lives. Eventually, exhaustion set in, and we decided to call it a night. She offered me a room on the second floor, right beside the balcony. When I stepped inside, I noticed the room felt unused. The air was still, and everything seemed untouched, as if no one had been there for a long time. It struck me as odd, especially since her older brother slept in the much smaller room. I wondered why, but I didn't ask. It wasn't a big deal, after all. She handed me 2 pillows and a blanket, wished me good night, and left me to rest. As I settled into bed, I decided to keep the lights on. It was something I always did when staying in someone else's house. I wasn't familiar with the place, and I didn't want to stumble in the dark if I needed to get up in the middle of the night. It was past midnight. I was exhausted, yet sleep refused to come. I felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching me. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it. To distract myself, I pulled out my iPad and started scrolling through my Facebook feed. As I glanced at the screen, my heart nearly stopped. In the reflection at the upper left corner, I saw a white silhouette standing behind me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I turned my head quickly, but there was nothing there, only the plain yellow wall. My pulse raced as I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was too tired, and my imagination was acting up. Taking a deep breath, I placed my iPad on the bedside table and forced myself to sleep. Sometime later, I woke up shivering. The room felt freezing. I reached for my blanket, only to realize it was no longer on me. It had fallen to the floor. Confused, I sat up and retrieved it. How had it ended up there? I was sure I hadn't kicked it off. My eyes darted around the room. Everything looked the same. I checked the door. Still locked. Maybe I was overthinking. I climbed back into bed and was about to close my eyes when the room's light began flickering. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the glow pulse erratically before finally going out. The room wasn't completely dark. Some light seeped through the window from the street lamp outside, but the sudden change sent unease crawling up my spine. I wanted to get up and turn the switch back on, but as I tried to move, an icy paralysis gripped me. I couldn't lift a finger. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free. My breathing quickened. I felt a presence, something near me, something watching. Then I saw her. A shadowy figure stood at the foot of my bed. A woman in a flowing white dress with long black hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was impossibly dark, as if it absorbed all light. There was no nose, no lips, just a pair of eerie gray eyes staring right at me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My body refused to obey me. She began moving, floating closer. My heart pounded against my ribs as I fought to move, to do anything to escape. She reached the right side of my bed, leaning closer, her head tilting unnaturally to the side until her face was mere inches from mine. The closer she got, the clearer her eyes became. They were gray, an unusual shade, especially for someone from this region. The sight unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. I had never seen anyone with eyes like that before. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, forcing my elbow to move. The moment I managed to break free, she vanished. 1 second she was there, looming over me, and the next, gone. Without hesitation, I grabbed my blanket and bolted out of the room, running straight downstairs to the living room. My chest heaved as I tried to calm myself. I sat on the couch, wrapping the blanket around me like a shield. Then, out of the silence, I heard a creaking noise. My eyes snapped toward the window just in time to see it shut by itself. That was it. That was the moment I spoke. Summoning whatever courage I had left, I spoke aloud in the calmest voice I could muster. I mean no harm. I'm only staying for the night. The air around me felt different after that, as if whatever was there had acknowledged me. I lay down on the couch, expecting another restless night, but strangely enough, I fell into a deep, undisturbed sleep. The next morning at breakfast, I recounted my experience to my friend and her family. To my surprise, they weren't shocked. They had experienced strange things in that house too. Her brother, the one who had previously stayed in that room, revealed that something used to pull his blanket away, even while he was still awake. One time, he said, I was going downstairs, and I heard a woman whisper in my ear. She said, "Help me." The words sent chills down my spine. Help me. Not in their native language, but in English. Then it hit me. The gray eyes. Whoever she wasn't from here. A foreigner, perhaps. An American? But who? And what kind of help did she need? The questions haunted me. Their neighbors had their own stories too. Some claimed to have seen an old man sitting on the couch in the living room, someone dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Yet, no one fitting that description lived there. I visited the house again after that. One evening, while we were sitting on the floor playing cards, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A large white butterfly drifted into one of the rooms. Curious, we got up to check. There was nothing there. No sign of an insect, no way it could have gotten in. The window was covered with a screen. Her mother eventually asked me if I could help get rid of whatever was in their house. Though I knew how, I hesitated. It wasn't my place. If I tried and failed, or if they retaliated, it could end badly. I had done something similar before, and it had nearly cost me my life. But that's a story for another time. So I told them, as long as they aren't hurting anyone, there's no need to take drastic action. Over time, I continued visiting, always making sure to acknowledge the presence in the house, letting it know I meant no harm. I stayed for days at a time without incident. Eventually, my friend's family moved back to their old home in Tarlac, and I never returned to that house again. But even now, I wonder, who was she? And what did she want? My experiences with the paranormal began when I was pregnant with my first child. At the time, I was living in my ex-husband's house, a place known to be haunted. People said that the land it was built on had always been strange. Before the house was there, it had been an empty lot covered in tall grass. Over the years, many had claimed to see eerie figures wandering the area at night, 3 nuns floating silently through the air, a ghostly woman in white, and even small gnome-like creatures. The first time I stepped foot in that house, when my ex-husband was still just my boyfriend, I immediately felt something was off. It wasn't just my imagination. There was a constant feeling of being watched, a sensation that clung to me no matter where I went inside the house. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was there. By the time we decided to live together, and I became pregnant with my son, Glenn, strange things started happening to me. At first, it was small things, coincidences, maybe. I developed the habit of waking up at exactly 3 a.m. every night with an urgent need to use the bathroom. The house was large, a 2-story structure with bedrooms, a living room, and a small kitchen on the top floor. The first floor, where we stayed, had 2 bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a dining area. The staircase sat right in the middle, leading up to the second floor. My ex-husband's room, where we slept, was the first room near the main door. To get to the bathroom, I had to pass through the hallway, past the dining area, and past his older brother's bedroom. One night, as I was in the bathroom, the doorknob suddenly twisted. Someone was trying to open the door. My heart pounded. I called out, "Someone's in here!" And just like that, the doorknob stilled. I hesitated before unlocking the door. When I stepped out, expecting to see someone, the hallway was empty. I checked our bedroom, and my ex-husband was still fast asleep. His older brother wasn't home. He was in college and rarely stayed in the house. That meant it had just been the 2 of us that night. I couldn't explain it. Another time, I woke up again at 3 a.m., about to get up for the bathroom, when I heard footsteps from the second floor. Slow, deliberate steps, pacing above us. I froze, because I knew no one could be up there. His mother and brother had left for the province, and it was just the 2 of us in the house. I shook my ex-husband awake and whispered about the footsteps. "Go check," I told him. He stiffened but didn't move. Instead, he pulled the blanket over his head and muttered, "Just go back to sleep." I didn't know what to do. I listened, hearing the footsteps continue for a few minutes before they finally stopped. I locked the bedroom door and forced myself to sleep, though fear sat heavy in my chest. The next morning, I mustered the courage to check upstairs, just in case. Maybe someone had broken in. But there were no signs that anyone had been there. Everything was untouched. Then another night came, and at 3 a.m., I was awakened by a different sound: music. The delicate, eerie tune of an electric piano playing from the second floor. I shook my ex again, and this time, he heard it too. His reaction was the same. He hid under the blanket, refusing to move. The next morning, I checked the piano. It was an old electric keyboard that belonged to his mother, sitting in a corner near her bedroom door. A thick white cloth covered it, coated in dust. I checked the keys. No disturbance, no fingerprints, nothing. Then I followed the cord and found something that sent a shiver through me. The piano wasn't plugged in. Not only that, the plug itself was missing. The wire had been cut. When I asked my ex about it, he casually replied, "Oh yeah, my mom cut the plug off a long time ago. I don't know why." I stared at him. "Then how did it play last night?" He didn't answer. Instead, he admitted that things like this had been happening in the house for as long as he could remember. He had learned to ignore it, though he was terrified every time it happened. And it wasn't just one ghost. He told me there were many spirits there, one of them being his grandmother, who had passed away in that very house. They had tried to bless the house multiple times, but every time they even planned it, something would happen to stop them. Even his mother had made peace with the spirits. She would often talk to them when she was alone in her room. For some reason, everything seemed to intensify at 3 a.m. But as soon as I gave birth, the disturbances stopped. And by the time Glenn was 3 months old, we moved into our own apartment in another barangay. Years later, something similar happened again. I was now a single mother of 3, living in a different apartment with my parents. One morning, my youngest daughter, Zam, who was just 2.5 years old at the time, was watching cartoons in the living room while I was in the bedroom fixing the bed. Suddenly, she came running to me. Her tiny face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched her chest, gasping as if she had seen something that shocked her. I knelt beside her. "What's wrong?" She didn't speak at first. Then she raised her little hand and pointed toward the main door. I turned my head slowly. Nothing was there. When I asked her again what she had seen, she whispered, "Moo moo, takit ako. Ghost." I'm scared. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to frighten her further, so I picked her up and distracted her with toys, pretending nothing had happened. But over the next few months, strange things continued. Sometimes she would burst into laughter, as if someone was tickling her, even when she was alone. Other times, she would stare at a particular spot in the house, at the wall, the ceiling, the doorway, her lips moving as if she were speaking to someone unseen. Then she would smile, giggle, as if responding to an invisible friend. At first, I told myself she had simply made a friend, even if that friend wasn't someone I could see. Then one night, something even stranger happened. She had fallen asleep in my parents' room, on the top bunk of the double-deck bed. My second child, Zai, had placed pillows around her as a barricade to make sure she wouldn't fall. Later that night, my father and my 2 older kids were in the living room watching TV. My mother was busy in the kitchen. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the bedroom. It sounded like someone had fallen. Panicked, they ran inside, only to find my daughter sleeping peacefully on my parents' bed. The pillows on the top bunk were untouched, still perfectly arranged the way Zai had left them. There was no way she had climbed down. The bed was high, without stairs, and she was too small to make the jump. They called me immediately, their voices shaken. The only explanation that made sense? Something, or someone, had moved her. But instead of hurting her, they had placed her gently onto the bed. I don't know what to make of it. Whoever this presence is, I don't think it means any harm. It feels more like protection. But still, I can't help but wonder, should I be afraid? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I have a friend who lost his mind after visiting one of the most famously haunted beaches in Brazil. He had gone there as part of an investigation team, working under my other friend's uncle. Whatever happened to him that night changed him forever. He was found injured, his phone mysteriously exploding in his hands. He was rushed to the hospital, his mind shattered, his body covered in small burns and bruises. While recovering, he kept scribbling strange symbols and letters on scraps of paper. No one was allowed to read them. He tore them apart if anyone tried. The few that weren't destroyed made no sense. They were just erratic lines, overlapping words, and random marks that didn't form any coherent message. That was a year ago. Now, I was visiting him again. It was one of his treatment days, meaning I had to take him to another hospital, a mental hospital. I dropped him off at the entrance first, then went to park the car. The only available spot was at the far end of the lot. It was a long walk back to the building. By the time I reached the waiting area outside the doctor's room, I was exhausted. I sat down and let out a deep breath, rubbing my face. The quiet hum of the hospital, the muffled voices of nurses passing by, the distant beeping of machines, it all blended together into a dull background noise. I felt my eyelids grow heavy. I must have been on the verge of dozing off when I sensed someone sit beside me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe another patient or a friend of my friend. Half asleep, I muttered a soft "Hola," greeting the person beside me. No response. I turned slightly and saw a young woman sitting next to me. She didn't react. Her face was completely expressionless, as if she hadn't even heard me. I shook off the discomfort and ducked my head down, resting my elbows on my knees. Just a few minutes of rest, that's all I needed. Then, in a soft voice, she spoke. "Você está cansado? Are you tired?" Something about her voice sent an unnatural chill down my spine, but I forced myself to answer. Pouco. A little. I lifted my head to look at her again. But my friend was standing in front of me instead, staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. I blinked. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. His lips trembled, and he started mumbling something under his breath. I glanced to my side where the woman had been sitting. She was gone. A sudden unease filled my chest. I called for the doctor. He quickly led my friend back into the examination room while I sat there, still shaken by what had just happened. Then, right by my right ear, I heard it. A soft, breathy chuckle. I turned sharply. Nothing. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a dream. I was fully awake. I knew what I had seen. What I had felt. Minutes later, my friend came out, looking pale and shaken. He muttered a quick apology, but I wasn't sure for what. His hands were trembling. He was sweating. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He shook his head, still refusing to meet my eyes. "Come outside with me." I followed him out of the hospital, the fresh air doing little to ease the tension hanging between us. He sat down on a bench, his hands gripping his knees. I bought a fizzy drink from a street vendor and handed it to him. He took it but didn't drink. Instead, he finally looked at me, his eyes filled with something between fear and despair. His voice was barely above a whisper when he asked, "Você viu aquela garota? Did you see that girl?" My breath caught in my throat. "Who are you talking about?" His hands tightened around the can. "Ela estava ao seu lado." She was beside you. I felt my body grow cold. "What are you talking about? You mean in the hospital?" He nodded, his face unreadable. "When I came out, she was there, sitting next to you. But when you looked up, she was gone." I swallowed, my throat dry. I didn't know what to say. "Chill out," I muttered, more to myself than to him. But he didn't calm down. If anything, he seemed even more disturbed. He kept shaking his head, his fingers drumming anxiously against his knee. For a few moments, we sat in silence. Then, suddenly, he spoke again. "I need help," he said, his voice trembling. "I've lost my mind." I knew what he meant. I had seen it in his face. Felt it in the air. I thought back to the strange woman, the whisper, the chuckle in my ear. "I might have experienced what you're talking about," I admitted. But maybe there's a way to fix this. He looked up, his eyes desperate. How? I hesitated. There was only one thing I could think of. I have relatives from my grandmother's side. They do cleansing rituals. Maybe it can help. At first, he seemed to consider it. But then, out of nowhere, his entire demeanor changed. His body tensed, his breathing became erratic, and his face contorted in panic. Como ela vai me deixar? He muttered under his breath. How will she let me go? He clenched his fists, his entire body trembling. His reaction caught me off guard, and for a second, I felt real fear. I carefully placed a hand on his shoulder. It's just a ritual. It won't hurt you. His eyes darted around as if something invisible was lurking nearby. She won't let me, he whispered. I had never seen him like this before. It was as if something inside him had snapped. I had no idea if it was mental illness or something worse. I took a deep breath. Let's just go home for now, I said, trying to steady my voice. Reluctantly, he nodded. I drove him back to his house and called my relatives, explaining the situation. They listened carefully and told me to bring him whenever he was ready. But that's the problem. Will he ever be ready? Even now, I don't know if this is psychological or spiritual. What if he's still carrying something from that haunted beach? Could a spirit have followed him after all this time? And if so, why him? I keep thinking back to that moment in the hospital. Was I really awake when I greeted that woman? Or was I trapped between sleep and reality? And yet I remember the feeling of her presence beside me. The cold chill in the air. The breathy chuckle that made my skin crawl. I want to help my friend, but the truth is I'm scared. Scared that whatever is haunting him saw me too. And if it did, what happens next? The first time I heard it was when I was about 16, living in an apartment with my parents in Riga, Latvia. One quiet night, I suddenly woke up around 4 in the morning. The room was dark and silent, too silent. Then, breaking through the silence, I heard it clearly, the sound of someone breathing. It came from the far corner of my room, rhythmic and peaceful, like someone in a deep sleep. I froze, my heart racing in fear. Who could it possibly be? We lived on the 5th floor, and there was no one else in my room. Terrified, I pulled my blanket tightly over my head, trying to block out the sound. But the breathing continued, steady and calm, echoing softly in the stillness of my room. I stayed hidden beneath the covers, listening intently, too afraid to move. Time felt stretched out and endless. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, the sun began to rise, and the breathing finally faded away when my cat rushed into the room, breaking the spell and bringing life back to the silence. Our apartment had always felt a bit strange. My parents had mentioned seeing shadowy figures on multiple occasions, quick movements at the corners of their vision, things they couldn't quite explain. Both my parents had also experienced sleep paralysis, describing vivid and terrifying encounters. I remember clearly the time my mother came rushing into my room, asking me why I had called out to her, but I hadn't said a single word. She insisted that I had called her name, but I had done nothing of the sort. At the time, I believed my mother might simply be sensitive, or maybe she had psychic abilities. Other times, I would hear knocking on the windows at night. Again, we lived on the 5th floor. No one could have been outside. Still, I convinced myself these things were products of my imagination. But this breathing, it felt different. It felt real. After that first night, I thought perhaps it had been just a strange occurrence. Maybe I had imagined it in my sleepy state. But then it happened again. On another quiet night, in the darkness of my room, the same gentle, rhythmic breathing returned. It felt both familiar and unsettling. Again, I waited it out until morning, unable to understand or explain the experience. A few years later, I moved out of that apartment to attend college. For a while, everything seemed normal again. No strange occurrences, no eerie sensations. But one night, to my surprise, in my new apartment, the breathing returned. How could this be possible? I wasn't in the same place anymore. Yet there it was, unmistakably clear, echoing quietly in my new room. The most unsettling experience occurred several years later. By then, I had moved to another country entirely, settling temporarily in Dublin, staying at a friend's flat. Life was difficult during that period. I had lost my job and my apartment, and I was struggling emotionally. One day, as I sat in the living room in broad daylight, something impossible happened. I heard the breathing again. This time, it was daytime, and the sound was louder, clearer. It seemed to come from the middle of the room, close to the floor, almost like a dog lying peacefully and breathing steadily. I was startled at first, but not as scared as I usually felt at night. Still, the idea that this breathing had followed me across countries was incredibly unnerving. In a panic, I ran to find my friend. When we returned to the room together, the breathing had stopped. She looked at me skeptically. Even though she believed in the paranormal herself, she insisted that her flat had always felt peaceful, free from any strange phenomena. She gently suggested I was stressed, that perhaps my troubled circumstances were making me imagine things. Oddly enough, after hearing that breathing in her apartment, my luck turned around almost immediately. Within a short time, I found a new job and a nice apartment to rent, and my life began to improve rapidly. Not long after moving out, my friend called me. She was shaken. She confessed that she had no choice but to believe me now, because she had heard the breathing herself. It had happened to her only once, but it was enough. She admitted she didn't feel frightened by it. In fact, she described sensing a strange comfort or positive presence within the room. It felt as if the breathing wanted acknowledgement, as if it refused to be dismissed as mere imagination. Many more years passed, and just a week ago, I visited my mother in our old apartment, the very place where it all began. Early in the morning, around 5, I woke up once again to that familiar sound. It came from the same corner of the room, exactly as it had years ago. This time, surprisingly, I wasn't terrified, I was curious. I sat up in bed, quietly listening to the peaceful inhalations and slow, steady exhalations. I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. Could it be my mother breathing in the next room? Unlikely. Could it be the radiators? Impossible, they were off. Was there anything else that could explain this sound? I got out of bed and stood in the room, carefully observing the spot from where the breathing originated. As I stood up, the breathing seemed to grow louder, almost as if it wanted me to pay attention. I slowly reached for the lamp on my nightstand, turning it on in hopes of seeing something or someone. But the moment the light came on, the breathing abruptly stopped. I felt a strange disappointment then, wishing I hadn't interrupted it. Only later did it occur to me that I could have recorded it on my phone. The sound had been so clear, so undeniable. I've spent a lot of time thinking about these experiences. I've come to believe that perhaps we are always surrounded by spirits, or beings who watch over us. Maybe we each have spirit guides looking out for us. Perhaps this particular spirit comes to me during difficult times, breathing calmly, comforting me, silently letting me know it's there. Maybe it's a form of communication, a gentle presence without any other way of reaching out. Or perhaps it's a spirit from a past life, maybe a beloved pet, or someone who once knew me, returning in this quiet, peaceful way. I have the feeling it chooses breathing deliberately. Maybe it doesn't wish to frighten me. Maybe breathing is the simplest, most peaceful way to make itself known without overwhelming me. Whatever this presence might be, I no longer feel threatened by it. Instead, I'm strangely comforted. It feels reassuring to think that someone, or something, might be quietly watching over me, breathing steadily, guiding me through life's toughest moments. I can't say for certain who or what it is, but I'm grateful for its quiet companionship, for its gentle, mysterious comfort. And should I ever hear it again, this time, I'll be ready to listen, ready to accept, and perhaps even ready to understand. This experience happened when I was 18, back in 2004. Throughout my life, I've encountered several unexplained incidents that have convinced me the spiritual world is real. I have seen spirits, witnessed possessions, and even experienced some comforting moments when someone was about to pass away. Still, despite my belief, I had never felt the true fear of directly encountering a spirit. Being young and reckless at the time, a few of my friends and I decided it would be thrilling to test the boundaries and disturb the peace of the supernatural. As teenagers, we would often look for ways to earn extra money beyond our regular pocket allowance. Sometimes, we would bet each other to perform impossible or daring tasks, tempting each other with cash. Yes, looking back now, I realize how foolish and insensitive it was, but back then, we only cared about the excitement and the challenge. One day, I desperately needed extra cash, and my friends saw it as the perfect opportunity to set up a particularly spooky dare. They challenged me to smoke a cigarette while sitting alone on top of a tombstone in a cemetery. The condition was simple: I couldn't panic, scream, or run away until I had completely finished smoking. My friends would stay in the car outside the cemetery gates, watching from afar. Even though the idea scared me, I convinced myself it would be fine. After all, how bad could it really be? So, we drove to Maple Grove Cemetery in Wichita, Kansas. When we got there, instead of handing me a cigarette, my friends gave me a cigar. Anyone who's ever smoked knows cigars take much longer to finish. At first, I hesitated, unsure about the cigar, but when they added a $50 bill to the initial bet, I instantly agreed. I walked slowly into the cemetery, feeling nervous but determined. Finding a suitable tomb, I climbed onto it, lit the cigar, and started smoking. In the beginning, my hands trembled, and my heart raced, but after a few minutes, I felt calmer. The cemetery remained quiet, with only the soft sound of wind rustling through the trees. Nothing happened, no ghosts, no strange noises. I felt relieved and a little foolish for worrying. It took me about 20 minutes to finish the cigar. Just as I stood up, ready to claim my prize, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. My blood ran cold. Terrified, I slowly turned around, but no one was there. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and started walking quickly back toward the car. As I walked, I began to hear footsteps behind me, matching my pace. My heart raced again, but I told myself it was simply the echo of my own footsteps. Reaching the car, my friends greeted me with cheers. I collected my $125, laughing off the eerie feeling that had settled over me. When I got home later that night, I took a shower and headed to my bedroom. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed a horrible smell, like the strong odor of vomit. I checked everywhere, under the bed, behind furniture, but found nothing. I shrugged it off and got into bed. But just as I laid down, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I quickly turned my head, but again, nothing was there. Needless to say, it wasn't easy to fall asleep that night. The next morning, I woke up late, feeling unusually tired. When I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, I froze. Clearly visible on my shoulder were dark fingerprints, as if someone had grabbed me firmly. My skin isn't extremely pale, but it was clear enough to see distinct fingerprints. Panic rose in me, but I didn't dare tell my mother. At that moment, facing an angry spirit seemed preferable to facing her anger. I quickly called my friends and told them everything that happened. They were shocked and a little frightened because none of them experienced anything strange. Trying to calm myself, I headed to the kitchen for something to eat, knowing I was alone in the apartment. As I began making breakfast, I suddenly heard my bedroom door slammed shut. It startled me, but I quickly blamed the wind. Then, while preparing a smoothie, I distinctly heard a deep, angry grunt coming from right behind me. Spinning around, I caught a glimpse of a dark shadow swiftly moving through the kitchen door. That was the final straw. Fear took over, and I rushed out of the house, deciding to wait outside until my mother returned. The moment I saw my mother's car approaching, relief washed over me, and I ran straight to her, pouring out the entire story. My mother wasn't pleased, but instead of scolding me, she quickly went into protective mode. She took the money I'd won from my friends and burned it immediately, saying that the cash itself carried negative energy. Then, she went into her room and came out carrying her tarot cards and other spiritual equipment. She instructed me to sit in the middle of several lit candles. As she began murmuring quiet chants, the candles around me started flickering out, one by one, until the room was entirely dark. Once the last candle extinguished itself, my mother warned me never to disturb the spirits again. She explained that I had unintentionally attracted the spirit of an old man from the cemetery. The spirit was upset because I'd shown disrespect by sitting on his resting place. Fortunately, he wasn't malicious. He was only trying to teach me a lesson. My mother emphasized that playing such games could attract dark energies and might have irreversible consequences in the future. Feeling deeply remorseful, I returned to the cemetery later that day with fresh flowers. Placing them carefully on the tombstone, I quietly apologized for my reckless behavior. Fear and guilt overwhelmed me, and I even shed a few tears, promising sincerely never to repeat my mistake. After that, things settled down. I never saw the shadow or felt anything strange around me again. At least, not until I found myself drawn into another foolish adventure with my friends, one that taught me yet another unforgettable lesson about respecting the unknown. I was home alone for a week, starting Sunday, June 18th, up until today. My sister's holidays had just started, so she and my dad went away for a short vacation to visit my grandparents at the coast. Being a first-year university student meant my schedule was always packed with studying and assignments. Honestly, I didn't mind staying behind. In fact, I preferred it. Monday morning came quickly. I woke up around 6:30, got dressed, brushed my teeth, and went outside to spend some extra time with my dog, Sam. I filled his bowl with some leftover food from the previous night along with his usual dog food. He eagerly followed me out to my car afterward, excited as usual. But just as I climbed into the driver's seat, something changed in Sam's demeanor. His playful, energetic mood vanished instantly. Instead, he stood perfectly still beside the car door, staring intensely at the empty passenger seat. His ears were raised, his body rigid, and he seemed completely fixated. Confused, I glanced at the passenger seat, but it was empty. Looking back at Sam, I saw an expression I'd never seen from him before, one of deep worry, almost like he was silently pleading for me not to leave. Thinking he just wanted to come along, I stepped out, sat down beside him, and hugged him reassuringly. Yet he still didn't move, his eyes locked onto the passenger seat. Gently, I held his large head between my hands, turning his gaze toward me, and softly said I was sorry he couldn't come along. After one last pat on the back, I climbed back into my car, rolled down my window, and gave him a final goodbye before driving off. As I drove to the university, my thoughts wandered, and soon, the unusual incident slipped my mind completely. Not far from home, however, I started feeling a presence in the car with me. It wasn't frightening, but it certainly felt strange, like someone was quietly sitting right next to me, invisible but undeniably there. I reached the university, stepped out of the car, and as soon as I entered the building, that feeling vanished entirely. Shrugging it off as my imagination, I continued my day, which turned out to be long and uneventful. By evening, I'd completely forgotten about the peculiar feeling. Around 6 p.m., when classes were finally over, I returned to my car, and to my surprise, the sensation of having company returned the moment I sat behind the wheel. Again, I dismissed it as nothing but an overactive imagination. When I arrived home, Sam greeted me enthusiastically, jumping and running circles around my car like always. As I opened the door, he tried jumping onto my lap, but I quickly got out and gave him a brief hug. Suddenly, once again, he stopped abruptly and stared into the passenger seat, exactly like he did that morning. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the earlier experience, and realized something was definitely unusual. Animals often sense things humans can't. Unnerved, I hastily grabbed my bag from the back seat and locked the car. Normally, Sam wasn't allowed inside. He's a fully grown, 2-year-old pit bull. But this time, I took him into the house with me. It was starting to rain, and I felt safer having him nearby. As we moved away from the car, the feeling of the presence didn't disappear. It lingered, becoming increasingly evident. Yet, strangely enough, it didn't feel hostile. Instead, it felt sad. Curious and unsettled, I considered taking out my Ouija board to communicate, but I resisted the temptation. While fetching Sam's bed from outside, I noticed he'd wandered off, probably exploring. With him gone, the presence intensified. It was clearer now, I wasn't alone. Still, I'd rather have it around me than bothering Sam. Soon, Sam reappeared, stopping at the kitchen entrance. He instantly took an aggressive stance, growling fiercely at something beside me. I'd never seen him so hostile before. The presence weakened immediately as Sam lunged forward, snapping at empty air. Whatever he sensed must have moved away because he stared intensely toward my dad's bedroom door for several moments before calming down. After that, Sam returned to his usual playful self, leaving me confused and slightly shaken. Soon after, heavy rain began pouring down, accompanied by rolling thunder. It took all my concentration to finish a university project that night. Eventually, I decided to call it an early night and went to bed around 10. Sam lay beside me, and after tossing and turning for a couple of hours, I finally fell asleep. A loud thunderclap woke me suddenly around 3 in the morning, accompanied by Sam growling. He stood at my bedroom door, glaring intensely down the hallway. Immediately thinking of an intruder, I grabbed my pocket knife from the bedside table. Slowly, with Sam ahead of me, I approached the hallway. A faint, luminescent glow caught my attention from the direction of the living room, accompanied by soft sobbing sounds that sent chills down my spine. When we reached the living room, I froze. My knife slipped from my hand onto the floor, but I didn't dare move. 3 unfamiliar candles flickered on the coffee table, and there on the couch sat a girl, no older than 20, with hair black as midnight, skin pale as snow, and eyes deep and blue like the sea. She wore jeans and a dark sweater, appearing somewhat transparent and unnaturally dry despite the pouring rain outside. She slowly raised her teary eyes to meet mine. In that instant, it felt as though she looked straight into my very soul. Sam erupted into barking, charging toward her aggressively, but he passed straight through her translucent form, snapping and lunging repeatedly. Terrified, she cried out desperately, begging me to stop him. Finally breaking my paralysis, I called Sam repeatedly until he obediently retreated to my side. Lowering her tear-soaked hands from her face, she asked me in a trembling, heartbroken voice, "Why are you afraid?" Her sadness was overwhelming, something I can never truly explain. Guilt washed over me, and after a tense pause, I quietly asked her name. Softly, she replied, "Amelia." We ended up talking for hours that night about personal things, life, and loss. Sam relaxed, lying calmly at my feet. Amelia explained that she had died in 2004 but avoided sharing exactly how or why. After our conversation, I realized she had not come to harm me but to seek comfort. In fact, she even seemed to bring positivity, making me feel lighter and calmer than before. She appeared each night for 4 consecutive days, and instead of bringing fear or harm, she brought only comfort and help. Eventually, she became a welcome visitor, someone I grew to deeply appreciate. The sadness surrounding her gradually became less overwhelming, replaced by a feeling of peace I can't fully explain. I know this story may seem unusual, even unbelievable. At first, I resisted telling it because of its strange nature. Yet Amelia's presence was something real, tangible, and profoundly comforting. After her visits, I felt renewed, more hopeful, even. There's much more I could share about Amelia, but for now, I'll leave the story here. The experience forever changed my view on life and the world beyond ours. Amelia brought only kindness into my home during those 4 unforgettable days, proving not all spirits come bearing darkness. And one last thing. After that night, the candles she had brought remained on the table, candles I had never seen before she appeared. That alone reminds me every day that Amelia was real, and her presence was never just a dream. I was home alone for a week, starting Sunday, June 18th, up until today. My sister's holidays had just started, so she and my dad went away for a short vacation to visit my grandparents at the coast. Being a first-year university student meant my schedule was always packed with studying and assignments. Honestly, I didn't mind staying behind. In fact, I preferred it. Monday morning came quickly. I woke up around 6:30, got dressed, brushed my teeth, and went outside to spend some extra time with my dog, Sam. I filled his bowl with some leftover food from the previous night along with his usual dog food. He eagerly followed me out to my car afterward, excited as usual. But just as I climbed into the driver's seat, something changed in Sam's demeanor. His playful, energetic mood vanished instantly. Instead, he stood perfectly still beside the car door, staring intensely at the empty passenger seat. His ears were raised, his body rigid, and he seemed completely fixated. Confused, I glanced at the passenger seat, but it was empty. Looking back at Sam, I saw an expression I'd never seen from him before, one of deep worry, almost like he was silently pleading for me not to leave. Thinking he just wanted to come along, I stepped out, sat down beside him, and hugged him reassuringly. Yet he still didn't move, his eyes locked onto the passenger seat. Gently, I held his large head between my hands, turning his gaze toward me, and softly said I was sorry he couldn't come along. After one last pat on the back, I climbed back into my car, rolled down my window, and gave him a final goodbye before driving off. As I drove to the university, my thoughts wandered, and soon, the unusual incident slipped my mind completely. Not far from home, however, I started feeling a presence in the car with me. It wasn't frightening, but it certainly felt strange, like someone was quietly sitting right next to me, invisible but undeniably there. I reached the university, stepped out of the car, and as soon as I entered the building, that feeling vanished entirely. Shrugging it off as my imagination, I continued my day, which turned out to be long and uneventful. By evening, I'd completely forgotten about the peculiar feeling. Around 6 p.m., when classes were finally over, I returned to my car, and to my surprise, the sensation of having company returned the moment I sat behind the wheel. Again, I dismissed it as nothing but an overactive imagination. When I arrived home, Sam greeted me enthusiastically, jumping and running circles around my car like always. As I opened the door, he tried jumping onto my lap, but I quickly got out and gave him a brief hug. Suddenly, once again, he stopped abruptly and stared into the passenger seat, exactly like he did that morning. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the earlier experience, and realized something was definitely unusual. Animals often sense things humans can't. Unnerved, I hastily grabbed my bag from the back seat and locked the car. Normally, Sam wasn't allowed inside. He's a fully grown, 2-year-old pit bull, but this time, I took him into the house with me. It was starting to rain, and I felt safer having him nearby. As we moved away from the car, the feeling of the presence didn't disappear. It lingered, becoming increasingly evident. Yet, strangely enough, it didn't feel hostile. Instead, it felt sad. Curious and unsettled, I considered taking out my Ouija board to communicate, but I resisted the temptation. While fetching Sam's bed from outside, I noticed he'd wandered off, probably exploring. With him gone, the presence intensified. It was clearer now, I wasn't alone. Still, I'd rather have it around me than bothering Sam. Soon, Sam reappeared, stopping at the kitchen entrance. He instantly took an aggressive stance, growling fiercely at something beside me. I'd never seen him so hostile before. The presence weakened immediately as Sam lunged forward, snapping at empty air. Whatever he sensed must have moved away because he stared intensely toward my dad's bedroom door for several moments before calming down. After that, Sam returned to his usual playful self, leaving me confused and slightly shaken. Soon after, heavy rain began pouring down, accompanied by rolling thunder. It took all my concentration to finish a university project that night. Eventually, I decided to call it an early night, and went to bed around 10. Sam lay beside me, and after tossing and turning for a couple of hours, I finally fell asleep. A loud thunderclap woke me suddenly around 3 in the morning, accompanied by Sam growling. He stood at my bedroom door, glaring intensely down the hallway. Immediately thinking of an intruder, I grabbed my pocket knife from the bedside table. Slowly, with Sam ahead of me, I approached the hallway. A faint, luminescent glow caught my attention from the direction of the living room, accompanied by soft sobbing sounds that sent chills down my spine. When we reached the living room, I froze. My knife slipped from my hand onto the floor, but I didn't dare move. 3 unfamiliar candles flickered on the coffee table, and there on the couch sat a girl, no older than 20, with hair black as midnight, skin pale as snow, and eyes deep and blue like the sea. She wore jeans and a dark sweater, appearing somewhat transparent and unnaturally dry despite the pouring rain outside. She slowly raised her teary eyes to meet mine. In that instant, it felt as though she looked straight into my very soul. Sam erupted into barking, charging toward her aggressively, but he passed straight through her translucent form, snapping and lunging repeatedly. Terrified, she cried out desperately, begging me to stop him. Finally breaking my paralysis, I called Sam repeatedly until he obediently retreated to my side. Lowering her tear-soaked hands from her face, she asked me in a trembling, heartbroken voice, "Why are you afraid?" Her sadness was overwhelming, something I can never truly explain. Guilt washed over me, and after a tense pause, I quietly asked her name. Softly, she replied, "Amelia." We ended up talking for hours that night about personal things, life, and loss. Sam relaxed, lying calmly at my feet. Amelia explained that she had died in 2004 but avoided sharing exactly how or why. After our conversation, I realized she had not come to harm me but to seek comfort. In fact, she even seemed to bring positivity, making me feel lighter and calmer than before. She appeared each night for 4 consecutive days, and instead of bringing fear or harm, she brought only comfort and help. Eventually, she became a welcome visitor, someone I grew to deeply appreciate. The sadness surrounding her gradually became less overwhelming, replaced by a feeling of peace I can't fully explain. I know this story may seem unusual, even unbelievable. At first, I resisted telling it because of its strange nature. Yet Amelia's presence was something real, tangible, and profoundly comforting. After her visits, I felt renewed, more hopeful, even. There's much more I could share about Amelia, but for now, I'll leave the story here. The experience forever changed my view on life and the world beyond ours. Amelia brought only kindness into my home during those 4 unforgettable days, proving not all spirits come bearing darkness. And one last thing. After that night, the candles she had brought remained on the table, candles I had never seen before she appeared. That alone reminds me every day that Amelia was real, and her presence was never just a dream. It was August 2004, and I was a young 18-year-old fresh out of basic common sense. Throughout my life, I've experienced many unexplained encounters, some comforting, some disturbing, and these events shaped my belief that the spirit world is real. Despite this, I had never come face to face with anything truly frightening. Perhaps due to youthful arrogance or plain curiosity, my friends and I often challenged each other, tempting fate by provoking whatever might linger on the other side. Back then, my friends and I frequently made bets and dares as a quick way to make some extra cash. The idea was simple: do something daring or even foolish to prove courage, and earn some money in the process. Looking back, I realize how irresponsible that was, but at the time, it felt like harmless fun. One evening, desperately needing extra cash, my friends decided to test my nerves. They dared me to smoke an entire cigarette alone, sitting atop a tombstone at a local cemetery. The rules were straightforward: no panicking, no shouting, and no running away until the cigarette was finished. They'd wait safely in the car outside the cemetery gates, watching from a safe distance. Though nervous, I agreed. How hard could it be? We drove out to Maple Grove Cemetery in Wichita, Kansas. But once we got there, my friends threw a curveball. They handed me a cigar instead of a cigarette, knowing full well a cigar would take much longer to smoke. Initially hesitant, I quickly changed my mind when an additional $50 was thrown into the bet. I couldn't resist the challenge. Taking the cigar, I made my way nervously into the graveyard alone. Finding a tombstone large enough to sit on, I lit the cigar, took a deep breath, and started smoking. At first, my hand shook slightly, and I kept looking around nervously. But minutes passed, and nothing strange happened. Gradually, I relaxed, thinking it wasn't as bad as I'd imagined. It took about 20 long minutes to finish the cigar. Finally done, I stood up, relieved and ready to leave. That's when I felt it, a gentle tap on my shoulder. My blood instantly ran cold. I froze, terrified to turn around, yet compelled by curiosity. Slowly, I turned my head and found nothing behind me. Rationalizing it as my imagination, I hurried back toward the car, though a strange sense of unease followed. Walking away from the grave, I clearly heard footsteps behind me. Convincing myself it was just my imagination or my own echoes, I quickened my pace. Back at the car, my friends cheered and handed over my reward of $125. Smiling uneasily, I brushed off the strange feeling and headed home. When I got home, I immediately took a shower, trying to wash off the eerie feeling that lingered. Afterward, entering my bedroom, I noticed a horrible stench, like something rotten or spoiled. I searched everywhere, puzzled because nothing could explain the smell. I shrugged it off again and got into bed. But as soon as my head touched the pillow, I glimpsed movement out of the corner of my eye. Turning quickly, I saw nothing. Unsettled, sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, feeling oddly exhausted, I went to take another shower. Looking in the mirror, I froze in shock. Clear fingerprints marked my shoulder, as if someone had firmly grabbed me. The sight gave me instant chills. Although scared, I didn't tell my mother. Facing an angry ghost seemed preferable to facing her disappointment. Immediately, I called my friends, telling them what had happened. They were equally frightened, none of them having experienced anything unusual. Alone in my apartment, I went to the kitchen to prepare some food. Suddenly, the bedroom door slammed shut loudly. I tried to convince myself it was just a draft. However, just as I was about to blend my smoothie, I heard a deep, angry grunt behind me. Whipping around, I caught sight of a shadow darting out of the kitchen. That was my breaking point. I ran straight outside, waiting there in fear until my mother returned. As soon as my mom arrived, I rushed to her car and told her everything. Although upset with my reckless behavior, she didn't scold me. Instead, she took immediate action. She grabbed the money I'd earned from the dare and burned it, claiming it carried negative energy from my disrespectful act. Then, my mom retrieved her tarot cards and spiritual supplies, placing candles around me. She whispered protective chants as each candle slowly went out, one after another. Once finished, she firmly instructed me never to disrespect the resting places of the dead again. My mom explained that I had unintentionally attracted the spirit of an elderly man from the cemetery. Thankfully, he wasn't dangerous, just upset at my disrespect. But my mother warned that my behavior could bring dangerous energies, possibly causing permanent harm. Filled with remorse, I immediately went back to Maple Grove Cemetery with flowers. Standing by the tombstone, I sincerely apologized, even shedding a few tears out of guilt and fear. I promised never to repeat such a reckless act again. After that sincere apology, the unsettling incidents completely stopped. The shadow, the strange smells, the footsteps, all vanished. It seemed the old spirit had accepted my remorse. Still, the lesson stuck with me. The spirit world isn't a joke, and it's wise never to disrespect the unknown again, at least until my next foolish adventure with my friends. This happened back when I was 18 years old, in 2004. Throughout my life, I've experienced several events that convinced me the spiritual world exists. I've seen spirits, witnessed unexplainable possessions, and even experienced comforting moments just before someone's passing. Still, I never fully understood the true fear of encountering a spirit firsthand. As young, reckless teenagers, my friends and I were always eager to test the boundaries of what we couldn't explain, often challenging ourselves to daredevil tasks just for fun and extra cash. It wasn't uncommon for us to create risky bets, tempting each other with money to perform daring or even foolish acts. Looking back, it was careless and disrespectful, but at that age, the excitement always got the better of us. One particular evening, when I was short on money, my friends proposed a chilling dare. They challenged me to smoke a cigarette while sitting alone atop a tombstone in a local cemetery. The rules were clear. I had to sit there calmly until I finished smoking, without panicking, shouting, or running away. My friends would remain in the car outside, watching from a safe distance. Feeling uneasy but confident that nothing terrible would actually happen, I accepted. We drove to Maple Grove Cemetery in Wichita, Kansas. When we arrived, my friends changed the game by handing me a cigar instead of a cigarette, knowing a cigar would take longer to finish. I hesitated, but when an additional $50 was added to the bet, I quickly agreed. Taking a deep breath, I walked alone into the graveyard and found a suitable tombstone to sit upon. Lighting the cigar, I felt shaky at first but eventually relaxed as nothing strange happened. It was quiet, just me, the smoke, and the calm night air. After about 20 tense minutes, I finally finished the cigar. As I stood up to leave, something unexpected happened. I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. I froze, terrified to look behind me. Gathering all my courage, I turned slowly, but there was nothing there. I convinced myself it was just nerves and quickly walked toward the car. On my way back, I distinctly heard footsteps trailing me. Trying to convince myself it was just an echo, I picked up my pace, reaching the car and pretending everything was fine. My friends congratulated me, handing me the $125 reward, unaware of how shaken I truly was. When I got home, I took a shower and headed straight to my bedroom. Immediately upon entering, I noticed a foul smell, like vomit. I searched everywhere for the source but found nothing. Shrugging it off, I climbed into bed. But the moment my head hit the pillow, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. I quickly turned, but again nothing. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, feeling exhausted, I headed to the shower. Glancing at the mirror, I froze. There, clear as day, were fingerprint-shaped bruises on my shoulder. My skin is fair enough that the marks stood out vividly, sending chills down my spine. Despite my fear, I decided not to tell my mom, believing her reaction would be worse than dealing with whatever entity was around. I quickly called my friends to share the strange experience. They were shocked and disturbed since none of them experienced anything unusual. Alone in my apartment, I went to the kitchen to fix something to eat, still anxious from everything that had happened. Suddenly, my bedroom door slammed shut. I jumped but blamed it on the wind. Then, as I began making a smoothie, a loud, angry grunt sounded right behind me. Spinning around, I clearly saw a shadow swiftly moving through the kitchen door. Panic overcame me, and I bolted from the house, refusing to go back inside until my mother returned. As soon as I saw her car coming down the driveway, I ran to her in tears, telling her everything that had happened. Rather than scolding me, she took immediate action. She took the money I'd earned from the dare and burned it, explaining that it carried negative energy from my disrespectful actions. Then she retrieved her tarot cards and candles, placing them around me as she murmured protective prayers. One by one, each candle extinguished itself. Once finished, my mother warned me never to repeat my reckless behavior. She explained I had attracted the spirit of an old man from the cemetery. He wasn't malicious, just offended by my disrespectful behavior. She warned that reckless actions like these could draw in darker entities with more harmful intentions, causing irreversible damage. Deeply remorseful, I returned to the cemetery with flowers. Placing them gently on the tombstone, I tearfully apologized, promising never to disturb any resting spirits again. After my sincere apology, all the strange occurrences ceased immediately. The shadow, strange smells, and unsettling sounds disappeared completely. That experience taught me to respect things I couldn't understand. Although I never encountered that particular spirit again, I learned my lesson the hard way. Some boundaries are never meant to be crossed, and some things are better left undisturbed. I've lived in an old workers' semi-detached cottage in Newtown since 1993. The house is over 100 years old, nestled in a historic inner-city suburb. When I first bought it, I was drawn to the warm and welcoming energy it carried. Unlike many old homes, this one had never given me any reason to feel uneasy. In all the years I had lived there, I had never encountered anything paranormal, until my eldest son turned 16. It started in late 2003. My son developed a habit of calling me before he arrived home, always asking me to turn on the porch light and leave the front door and gate open for him. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as the months went by, the routine became so frequent that it started to annoy me. Every evening, like clockwork, he'd call. Finally, after several months of this, I asked him why he insisted on these precautions. That was when he admitted the real reason. He believed there was a ghost outside our house. At first, I thought he was joking. He had always been a bit of a prankster, so I brushed it off, teasing him in return. But his reaction was serious. Whenever he rushed through the door at night, he was pale and on edge, often slamming it shut behind him. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't playing a game. He was genuinely frightened. Still, I remained skeptical. If something paranormal was happening around our home, wouldn't I have noticed it first? Then, small things began to make me question my certainty. On nights when I watered the front garden, I started to feel an odd sensation. The hair on my arms would stand up, as if someone unseen was watching me. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, but the feeling became harder to ignore. One Friday night, my son called as usual, telling me the ghost was standing outside again. Tired of his claims, I tried reasoning with him, insisting that our neighbor, who shared a common wall with us, was home. I had heard him earlier in his kitchen, opening and closing cupboards. But my son wouldn't let it go. He dragged me outside and asked me to look. The neighbor's house was completely dark. Then, he took me to the backyard to check if any lights were on there. Again, nothing. No sign of anyone home. That night left me unsettled. If my son had been making it all up, why would he go to such lengths? A few weeks later, I had my own experience. I was arriving home with my younger son, who was just 8 months old. It was early May, late autumn, and the sun was just beginning to set, casting a dim glow over the street. As I stood inside our front gate, fumbling in my handbag for my keys, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A man in a gray hat and a long gray coat glided silently toward the neighboring property. I say glided because there was no other way to describe it. He moved smoothly, too smoothly. There was no sound of footsteps. No creaking from the old wrought iron gate, which was usually loud. But what struck me the most was his skin, pale, almost unnaturally white, in stark contrast to the evening shadows. I hesitated, expecting to hear the jingle of keys, the click of a door unlocking, any indication that my neighbor was arriving home. But there was nothing. I peered over the low wall, my heart pounding. No one was there. In that moment, I realized my son had been telling the truth all along. I didn't tell him what I had seen. He was already anxious enough, and I didn't want to fuel his fear. Then, 2 weeks later, the strangest encounter happened. My son and I had gone to an early movie. On our way back, we were walking toward our house from across the street, chatting casually. We were just about to cross when, without warning, we both saw it at the same time. There, standing outside our neighbor's house, was the figure again. But this time, it wasn't just a man in a gray coat. This time, it was something far more unsettling. The figure stood shrouded in a dark, flowing cloak, its white face glowing eerily beneath a hood. It looked like something straight out of a nightmare, like the Grim Reaper himself. My son gripped my arm, his voice panicked. "Do you see it? Do you see it?" I swallowed hard but kept my voice steady. "Yes, I see it. But it's nothing to be afraid of. Just look straight ahead and ignore it. We're going home." With that, we crossed the street, walking right past it. Neither of us dared to look back. That was the last time my son ever saw the figure, though for a while afterward, I still felt its presence when I watered the garden at night. Eventually, I decided to take action. One evening, standing on my porch, I closed my eyes and focused my thoughts. "You're dead," You need to move on. Go into the light. And just like that, the presence faded. Months later, curiosity led me to ask about it during a tarot reading with a psychic I had been visiting for years. I hesitated before bringing it up, but once I did, she immediately started laughing. "Oh, this is kind of funny," she said. "He's dressed like the Grim Reaper, isn't he? He loves scaring your son." Her description sent chills down my spine. How could she have known? She went on to explain that he was a young man who had met a violent and sudden death. He had been roaming the area for a long time and happened to come across my son, someone who could see him. That's why he had attached himself to him, following him home night after night. She also reassured me that our house itself had been protected. The decorative quartz crystal sun catchers in my son's bedroom window and a crystal in a wind chime had prevented the spirit from crossing into our property. That was why it always lingered outside but never came in. Then she mentioned something that made my stomach turn. "His story is tied to something recent. A case that's been in the news. He died violently, and there's no grave for him." I felt my heart drop. At that time, an inquest was underway for a young man who had been a key witness in a criminal case involving a pedophile ring. Before he could testify, he was murdered. His body had been found dumped under a slab of concrete in an industrial estate near the Alexandra Canal in St. Peter's. A young man. A violent death. No grave. It fit. And suddenly, I no longer saw the spirit as a menace. I saw him for what he was, lost, wandering, searching for something he'd never find in this world. It was sad, really. After that, I never saw him again. But I still think about him sometimes, hoping that wherever he is now, he's finally found peace. Old Copley Hospital has stood in this town for well over a century. Originally built in 1886 as a small city hospital with just 25 beds, it expanded over time, growing into a sprawling medical facility that eventually swallowed up the original Queen Anne-style three-story structure. By the time it finally closed its doors in 1996, the hospital had served thousands, leaving behind generations of memories, some good, some tragic. Despite part of the old structure being declared a historic site, the city has been pushing for its demolition. I can't say I blame them. The building has been abandoned for years, slowly deteriorating, its once proud halls now silent and forgotten. Old Copley sits just a few blocks from my home, and I often find myself walking past it. Something about the place draws me in. Both of my children were born there, and maybe that's why I feel a certain attachment to it. I can't help but pause when I pass, sometimes even walking up to the building, running my fingers over the worn-out brick exterior. It doesn't seem fair somehow. A place that had once been filled with life and healing, now left to decay. Of course, it's rumored to be haunted. Over the years, various paranormal teams and urban explorers have snuck inside, claiming to have witnessed unexplainable phenomena. Disembodied voices, shadowy figures, even a doll that supposedly moved on its own. Maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe they aren't. But I've had my own experiences with that hospital, both inside and out. One evening, right around dusk, I was standing in front of the old entrance, peering through the large, dust-covered doors. The glass was dirty, but I could just make out the shape of someone approaching from the other side. I froze. My pulse quickened as I strained my eyes, waiting for the figure to become clearer. Was it a reflection? A trespasser? Then, suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat, nearly stumbling backward in fright. It was a cop. For nearly 2 full seconds, my brain struggled to process what had just happened. What I had seen in the glass wasn't someone inside the building, it had been the officer's reflection approaching me from behind. Relief flooded over me, quickly followed by embarrassment. He must have seen the look of absolute terror on my face because he barely held back a chuckle as he asked what I was doing there. I could only tell him the truth. Just stopping for a memory. The moment stuck with me, not just because of the scare, but because for those few seconds, I had genuinely believed I was seeing something beyond this world. I'm not saying Old Copley isn't haunted. I think it is. But whatever lingers there has been around long before its doors ever closed. Back in 1981, I had my first child at that hospital. It wasn't an easy delivery. I ended up needing an emergency C-section, and after the anesthesia wore off, I was lying in bed debating whether or not to call the night nurse. I was incredibly thirsty, but I hesitated. The maternity ward was eerily quiet, signaling that it was long past visiting hours. Nurses were busy, and I didn't want to bother them over something so trivial. That's when a nun walked into my room. I wasn't startled. There was a Catholic church just around the corner from the hospital, and although fewer nuns wore the full habit by then, she was dressed in the traditional attire, floor-length robes, a wimple framing her face, and a heavy rosary hanging at her waist. She smiled at me without speaking, then silently poured a glass of water from the pitcher on my nightstand. Why do they always put the pitcher just out of reach? I took the glass gratefully, drinking it down in a few gulps. Better? She asked gently. I nodded, already feeling relief. Much. Thank you. She gave me another warm smile, then turned and left, presumably to check on other patients. I remember thinking, just before drifting off to sleep, that she seemed to glow slightly in the dim hospital lighting. The next morning, a few other sisters stopped by, as they often did in maternity. They were dressed in the more modern uniforms, dove-gray jumpers, simple veils. Being the curious sort, I asked about the nun from the night before. Their reaction was immediate. They exchanged puzzled looks before one of them shook her head. No one in our order wears the full habit anymore, one of them said. Maybe she was visiting from another city? I wasn't convinced. Something about that interaction had felt too out of place. Flash forward 5 years, 1986, my second child, my second C-section. This time, I was lucky enough to have an amazing night nurse, Karen. She was the kind of nurse you never forget, the kind who went out of her way to make sure you were comfortable. When things were quiet, she'd sneak me coffee from the nurse's lounge, and if I was awake during her rounds, we'd chat for hours. One night, she suggested we go for a walk. It wasn't unusual. We often strolled the halls together, me hunched over with my forestand, and her ambling along beside me. But this time, something happened. We were approaching a corridor when we both saw her. The nun. She was walking toward us, head slightly bowed in what looked like silent prayer. My first instinct was to greet her. I had seen her before, after all. But something about her posture made me hesitate. Then Karen's grip on my elbow tightened. Her fingers dug in, and when I turned to look at her, she was pale, her eyes wide with something close to fear. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I frowned. "The nun?" She nodded stiffly. We both turned back toward the corridor. She was gone. Only other nurses and orderlies bustled about, but there was no sign of the woman in the habit. Back in my room, over cups of the strongest coffee Karen could find, she told me what I had just seen. "That was Sister Augustus," she said. "Or rather, her ghost." Sister Augustus had been a real person, a nun who had served at Old Copley decades ago. One of her most famous moments was during a horrific train accident, when a passenger train ran an open switch and collided with carboys of acid. The accident occurred just a mile from the hospital, killing and maiming several young boys who had been playing on the train cars. Sister Augustus was among the first to reach the scene, immediately tending to the wounded. She rode with the injured to the hospital, and despite suffering burns herself, refused treatment, insisting on helping care for the others first. Karen believed she never truly left the hospital. I don't know why I was able to see her twice, but I do know one thing: there was nothing frightening about her. If anything, she radiated a sense of peace, of quiet compassion. Maybe she continued watching over the hospital long after she passed, tending to patients who needed her, just as she had in life. Old Copley may be abandoned now, its walls crumbling, its history nearly forgotten. But I don't believe it's empty. I think some places remember the ones who cared for them. And I think some spirits never stop caring. "Sorry to interrupt," If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This encounter happened around 1982. It's been a long time since that night, but the memory of it has never faded. It was one of the first encounters I had with a spirit, though, at the time, I didn't realize it. Luckily for me, spirits tend to appear as normal people, so I never feel immediate fear when I see them. That night, however, was different. It happened under the North Pier of the Golden Gate Bridge. If you've ever been there, you know there's a parking lot and an incline that leads down beneath the North Tower. The area is surrounded by massive granite blocks, each one easily 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall. They were originally cut to support the bridge during its construction, but they were never removed. It's an eerie yet oddly peaceful place, the kind of spot that seems untouched by time. When you're in your early 20s and on a tight budget, you learn to appreciate simple, quiet places like that. I had been dating a man who lived in San Francisco, and since we were both young and broke, we often found free ways to spend time together. That evening, we decided to go to Ghirardelli for some chocolate and then take a walk under the North Tower, enjoying the view as the sun set. We arrived just before dusk, walking down to the small lighthouse, Fort Point Light. It had been decommissioned when the bridge was built, but it was still there, standing in quiet solitude at the edge of the water. We sat near it, perched on the little jetty, and talked while watching the city lights flicker through the rolling fog. The rhythmic blast of the foghorn under the South Tower echoed through the evening air. It was beautiful, almost surreal. By the time darkness fully settled, it had turned cold. San Francisco nights are notoriously windy, and we had only brought light jackets. We decided it was time to head back to the car and warm up with coffee at a little shop on 18th Avenue. As we walked back, just as we neared the granite blocks, I noticed a man sitting on top of one. He was close, maybe 5 feet away from us. He wore a red flannel shirt, wool pants, and worn work boots. Even in the dim light, I could see the glow of his pipe as he took slow, thoughtful puffs. The rich scent of tobacco carried on the breeze, mixing with the salty air. Without hesitation, I nodded at him and said, "Hello?" He looked at me, his expression calm and pleasant. "Hello?" he replied, his voice steady. "Fine evening, isn't it?" I smiled and, noticing the empty parking lot, asked, "Do you need a ride somewhere?" He shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm waiting for my wife and daughter." Something about his response felt strange. The way he said it, as if he had been waiting for a long time. "Are they driving here to meet you?" I asked. He let out a soft chuckle. "No, I'll see them when they walk up." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten slightly. And then I noticed my date. He wasn't just uncomfortable, he was terrified. He was practically hopping from foot to foot, his hands clutching my jacket sleeve with frantic urgency. Before I could say another word, he grabbed my elbow and pushed me toward the parking lot. Without another glance at the man, he shoved me into the car, slammed the door, and backed out so fast that the tires skidded on the pavement. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I demanded, still trying to process what had just happened. I was furious that he had interrupted my conversation so abruptly, embarrassed that he had acted so rudely to a complete stranger. But when I turned to look at him, my anger faded. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim car light. He looked like he was on the verge of tears. He didn't speak until we had completely crossed the bridge. Then, in a near-shouting voice, he asked, "Who were you talking to?" Confused, I answered, "The man sitting on the block." "What man?" His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. "I didn't see anyone there." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "He was right there. You were standing right next to me." He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "No, I wasn't. You were talking to a granite block." A chill crept down my spine. He continued, his voice shaking. "I smelled the pipe smoke. I saw something, like a shadow, but there was no one there, just you, standing and talking to nothing. And then, I don't know, It felt like the air around us turned freezing cold. I swear to God, I thought if we didn't leave, something terrible was going to happen. I thought we were going to disappear. I didn't argue with him after that. Later, unable to shake the encounter, I started looking into the history of the Golden Gate Bridge. Construction had begun in 1933, and by the time it was completed in 1938, several workers had died during the building process. Some had fallen into the water below, while others had been killed in various accidents. I started wondering if the man I spoke to had been one of them. Was he one of the workers who had lost his life during construction? Had he spent decades sitting there, watching the city, waiting? And if so, what did he mean when he said he was waiting for his wife and daughter? Were they still alive, somewhere in San Francisco, unknowingly walking past his ghost every now and then? It wasn't the last encounter I had with spirits, but it was the first one that truly stuck with me. I never saw my date again after that night. I suppose I can't blame him. If you take a girl out on a date, and she starts talking to people who aren't there, you might reconsider seeing her again too. But I'll never forget that man in the red flannel shirt, sitting on that granite block, quietly waiting. And I'll always wonder if, one day, he finally saw his family walking toward him, and whether he finally got to go home. When I was younger, I lived on Portland in Dorset, England, a place rich with history and, as many would say, the supernatural. Strange things always seemed to happen there, whispers of the past lingering in the air. This story is about one of the spirits I encountered while living there, an experience that remains vivid in my memory even now. When I was about 14, my family got a horse, and we kept him at a stable on the island. The stables were near a pair of abandoned windmills, structures that had stood for centuries. In the UK, historical buildings over a certain age can't be torn down, so these medieval windmills remained, surrounded by open fields, standing like silent sentinels watching over the land. They weren't too far from the village, but at night, the area felt isolated, with only the rustling of the wind and the occasional sounds of animals to break the silence. During the summer, I never had any reason to be at the stables after dark. But as winter settled in and the days grew shorter, darkness would fall as early as 4:30 p.m. By the time I finished my after-school activities and made my way there, night had already wrapped itself around the landscape. One evening, as I was filling up a hay net, I felt it, an unmistakable sensation of being watched. It was an eerie kind of awareness, the sort that prickles the skin and makes the back of your neck tingle. My mother has always been particularly sensitive to the paranormal, and it seemed I had inherited some of her ability. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel him. A boy. He felt young, around 13, lingering in the shadows, staring at me with unwavering intensity. I wasn't afraid exactly, but his presence was so strong, so persistent, that it made me uneasy. I quickly finished what I needed to do and left, heading down the track to wait for my mum to pick me up. In the following days, he was always there. Every time I went to fill up my hay nets, I could feel him watching. But he wasn't just observing, he was getting closer. Day by day, his presence intensified. By the weekend, I could still sense him, even in broad daylight. And then I started to see him. It began as fleeting glimpses from the corner of my eye, a shadow, a flicker of movement where there shouldn't be any. But soon, his image became clearer. He was tall and thin, with dark, slightly unkempt hair. He wore a white shift shirt, brown trousers, and notably, no shoes. His bare feet against the cold, damp ground unsettled me for reasons I couldn't quite explain. He never spoke, never made a sound, but I could feel his energy pressing in, growing stronger, as if feeding off my awareness of him. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. But it wasn't just in my head. I hadn't mentioned anything to my mum yet. I wasn't comfortable discussing supernatural things when I was younger. It made them feel too real. But one evening, as I got into the car, she gave me a look and asked, "Was anyone else at the stables with you?" I hesitated, confused by her question. "No," I answered. "I was the last one there." She didn't look convinced. "Are you sure?" Her tone made my stomach twist. It felt like an accusation, as if she knew I wasn't being entirely truthful, but I wasn't lying. I was the only person there. I insisted, then hesitated before adding, "But I keep feeling like someone's there with me." She nodded, as if she had expected my answer. Then she told me something that made my skin crawl. She had sensed him too. She told me that she believed the boy was from around the 1500s, and that he had been at the yard for a very long time. Other people had passed through over the years, but no one had ever noticed him before. But I did. And because I had acknowledged him, even unintentionally, his presence became stronger. She then told me about her own encounter with him. A few nights earlier, she had gone to the stables to care for my horse. As she finished up and walked back to her car, she could feel something, or someone, following her. She knew he was behind her, but she wasn't afraid. That changed when she sat in her car. The moment she switched on the engine and glanced at the window, he was there, leaning in, his face right against the glass, staring directly at her. It startled her so badly that she left immediately. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. She had seen him follow me, too. Every night when I walked down the track to meet her car, he was there, trailing behind me. But he never made it all the way. He always stopped halfway, as if something prevented him from going any further. A deep, shuddering fear settled in my chest. I hadn't felt truly scared until that moment. I had sensed him, seen him, but knowing that he had been following me every night without me realizing? That was different. My mum must have noticed my expression because she reassured me, telling me that I had nothing to be afraid of. He wasn't trying to harm me. He was just excited that someone had finally acknowledged him. But she also understood that his presence was starting to overwhelm me. "You need to tell him," she said. "Let him know that you see him, but that it's too much. Tell him he's scaring you." I was hesitant, but the next time I felt him near, I did as she told me. I spoke aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "I know you're here. I can feel you. But it's too much. You're scaring me." After that, everything changed. I still felt him watching me, but only from a distance. He never came too close again. Even now, I sometimes wonder about him. Who he was, how he died, why he remained at the stables for so long. Did he live there once, centuries ago? Was he waiting for something, or someone? I'll never know for sure. But I do know that for a brief time, he was there, trying to be seen. And I was the first person who ever saw him. It was probably sometime in the 1940s when my grandmother packed her bags and left for Singapore, taking her 3 daughters and youngest son with her. My 5th uncle was just a baby then, too young to understand the journey ahead. My grandfather, along with the 4 older boys, remained behind in Georgetown, on Penang Island, West Malaysia. Penang, a northern state of the Malaysian peninsula, sits just below Ipoh, which itself borders Thailand. My father's family were Peranakan, Straits-born Chinese, a unique cultural heritage that blended Chinese and Malay influences, with a touch of Thai ancestry from my grandmother's side. At the time, my father was still just a boy, probably around 8 or 10 years old. But he and his brothers had grown up with a strong sense of independence. They were responsible, disciplined, and already capable of taking care of themselves. Their father had drilled certain rules into them from a young age: keep the house clean, do your schoolwork, never fight among yourselves, look after each other, and, above all, stay indoors after dark. Grandpa was a dedicated teacher at the local village school, often keeping long hours. He spent his days planning lessons, marking papers, and even offering extra tutoring to students who needed help. Many evenings, he wouldn't return home until the sun had begun to dip below the horizon. Home was a modest, one-bedroom structure that had once been a garage or workshop. The walls were a patchwork of thin wooden planks, and the roof was little more than a flimsy covering of corrugated iron. Furniture was sparse, and times were hard. The family often had to make do with whatever they could scrounge from neighbors and friends. But despite their humble conditions, my father never spoke bitterly about his childhood. In fact, on the rare occasions he mentioned his father, his face would light up with fond memories. One evening, as Grandpa made his way home from school, he walked past the large monsoon drain that ran alongside the row of makeshift houses where he and his neighbors lived. The drain was treacherous during monsoon season, quickly filling with fast-moving water whenever it rained. He had always warned his sons to be careful when playing outside near the front of the house. He was almost home, the front door just within sight, when something caught his eye, a sudden flash of red. Instinctively, he turned his head and saw a small child running barefoot on the dusty path. The boy couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. His hair was cropped very short, and the only thing he wore was a bright red embroidered vest. In the fading light, Grandpa's first thought was that one of his younger sons had somehow managed to sneak outside, directly disobeying one of his strictest rules. He felt a flare of anger at the disobedience. "Why aren't you inside?" he scolded in Hokkien, his voice sharp with authority. "What are you doing running around dressed like that? Where are your shoes, and why aren't you wearing pants?" The little boy turned at the sound of his voice, hesitated for just a second, then bolted. Grandpa barely had time to react before the child disappeared right in front of his eyes. One moment he was there, flashing his tiny bear behind as he scampered away, and the next, gone. Too furious to notice anything unusual, Grandpa stormed into the house, ready to reprimand his sons. As the eldest, my father and first uncle were responsible for keeping an eye on the younger boys, and they had obviously failed in their duty. But just as he was about to scold them, he stopped mid-sentence. 4 pairs of wide, startled eyes looked up at him. He did a quick head count. 1, 2, 3, 4. All 4 of his sons were inside. Not one of them had stepped outside that evening. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. For the first time, he considered the details more carefully. That little red vest the boy had been wearing, it hadn't been an ordinary shirt. It had been a traditional Chinese dudu, an apron-like undergarment, usually worn by girls. It was something none of his sons owned. In fact, it was something none of them would ever wear. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He asked around the next day, checking with the neighbors, but no one could recall ever seeing a boy that age in the area. The family who lived closest to them only had 2 daughters, either of whom had hair that short. No one knew who the child might have been. After that evening, Grandpa never spoke about the incident again. My father and his brothers knew better than to bring it up. But the story remained a mystery in our family, passed down like an unsolved riddle. Nearly 30 years later, my father took my mother, my older sister, and me back to his old neighborhood in Georgetown. Much had changed, yet much had stayed the same. The dirt path where Grandpa had seen the boy in the red vest was now a cracked concrete footpath. The house itself, unbelievably, was still standing, a small, dilapidated shed, barely holding itself together. It was hard to imagine 4 energetic boys growing up in a space so cramped and worn, but somehow, Grandpa had made it work. My father was only 15 when his father passed away, and he himself has been gone for over 13 years now. Sometimes I find myself wishing that I had asked more questions when I was younger, that I had listened more carefully when he spoke about his childhood in Penang. There are so many details lost to time, stories I'll never fully know. But I do know this, Grandpa saw something that night. Something unexplainable. And whoever that little boy was, he appeared only to him. Someday, I'd like to return to Georgetown, to gather my sisters, cousins, and their children, and visit the place where our grandfather rests. Maybe then, we can pay our respects to Ah Kong, and perhaps, in some way, finally lay the mystery of the boy in the red vest to rest as well. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, in a house that my father built himself. There were no previous owners. My father is not a good man. He's done horrible things and is filled with cruelty and anger. I truly believe that much of the negative energy he carried was embedded into the walls of the home he built. Since I was very young, I've been surrounded by spirits. My mom, sister, brother, and I all seem to have certain sensitivities to paranormal activities. This story isn't about one isolated event. Instead, it's a collection of everything paranormal that occurred in our home as I grew up. When I was just a baby, I shared a room with my older sister, who was 6 years my senior. She remembers seeing terrifying faces floating above my crib as I slept. She'd lie awake at night, terrified, watching these eerie faces hovering around me. Our home was not a peaceful place. There was mental, emotional, physical, and even some sexual abuse. Because of this, the environment was ripe for negative energies and paranormal occurrences. One common thing we experienced regularly was hearing voices. But these voices weren't strangers. They were mimicking family members. We'd frequently hear our own names being called out by what sounded exactly like someone else in our household. I'd hear my mom, sister, or brother call my name when nobody was actually home, and when someone was home, they hadn't spoken. This happened to all of us regularly, and most of the time we were alone. We also regularly saw quick movements out of the corner of our eyes. Whatever it was, it moved swiftly like a person, darting back and forth. Our cats would sense this presence too, staring intensely at empty corners, fur puffed up, growling defensively at something invisible. At other times, we'd feel taps or tugs as if someone was trying to get our attention, though no one was there. Strangely, none of us spoke about these experiences until we were older and realized guests were having similar experiences. Only then did we begin to share our stories with each other. As we became teenagers, the entities started becoming more visible. Due to the high levels of negativity in our home, it seemed to draw energy from that and became stronger. It would manifest as a shadowy form that moved along the walls of our hallway. It would appear first in my bedroom, pass through the bathroom, continue into my sister's room, then through the office, and finally reach my brother's room. It traveled this route, randomly terrorizing us. At night, things became worse. I always felt watched and uneasy. Sometimes doors and drawers would open quietly, though I never heard them, despite being an extremely light sleeper. I'd awake suddenly to find everything open and displaced. I would close them and try to sleep again, but the fear lingered. My sister faced even more frightening experiences. She often felt her feet being tugged and pulled towards the edge of the bed, as if something was trying to drag her off. Sometimes she felt like she was being strangled, unable to breathe or scream. One night she heard something outside her window, breathing heavily. Too scared to look, she realized the sound was right outside the window. Terrified, she ran screaming to my mother, who woke up and tried to comfort her. My father brushed it off as wildlife, perhaps a deer or mountain lion outside. Yet strange things kept happening. We'd hear what sounded like someone running across our roof, triggering motion sensor lights outside. Every time we checked, nothing was there, no animals, no people. Our neighbors were close by, but nothing ever seemed to disturb them. The situation escalated further as we grew older. The spirit became more aggressive and started physically interacting with us. One night, I woke up completely paralyzed. Something heavy was pressing me down, pinning my arms, and breathing hot breath onto my face. I was frozen in fear, unable to scream. It only stopped when I forcefully thought, "Get off me!" Then it vanished in an instant. This terrifying experience was the last straw for me, and I started sleeping in the family room. A few days later, my sister joined me, refusing to stay alone in her room anymore. She never explained why, just saying she didn't like being far from me. These experiences became impossible to hide when visitors and friends stayed overnight. My brother had a friend stay over, and he felt the same choking sensation. My cousin also experienced being unable to breathe and felt an unseen presence trying to get into bed with him. Even my grandmother, when visiting, refused to stay in my room, claiming evil faces appeared in the corners, filled with malicious intent. One night, my brother had a distinct encounter. Sleeping in his locked bedroom, he was awakened by a voice calling his name. When he sat up, irritated and confused, he saw a man dressed oddly in a bowler hat, standing beside him. The figure stared at him silently, not overtly threatening but clearly unsettling. My brother cursed at him, and the figure immediately vanished, never appearing again. Over time, all of us kids moved out. My parents divorced, and my mother moved out, leaving my father alone in that house. Years later, my nephew visited and, knowing nothing about the house's history, told my mom he couldn't sleep because something scary was standing in the corner of the room. This confirmed for my mom what we had always known: something paranormal was deeply wrong with that home. Even after moving away, we continued experiencing disturbances. All of us kids began having nightmares and strange occurrences again, even in our new homes. We eventually realized that this entity had followed us, feeding off our energy. To finally reclaim peace, we each stood our ground, reclaiming the energy it had drained from us over the years. Gradually, the disturbances ceased. It's been 15 years since I last visited that house, and I know my father still lives there alone. Though the entity hasn't troubled us in years, the memories and experiences still haunt us all to this day. It all started when I met some friends through a shared interest in a historical figure. At the same time, I had developed a deep fascination with a deceased musician, one whose music and life had started to resonate with me on a level I couldn't quite explain. To my delight, two of my new friends, Aaron and Celia, not their real names, were also passionate fans. This mutual connection made our bond feel even stronger, as if we had been drawn together for a reason. As my interest in him grew, strange coincidences began happening. At first, they were small, his name popping up unexpectedly while I was searching for completely unrelated things. A photo of him somehow contained a link to my blog, even though I had never posted anything about him. Another time, while browsing Amazon for a history book, a recommendation for a book about him appeared, despite me using a computer that wasn't mine, with no stored search history that could have influenced the results. Then, the occurrences became eerier. One day, I was on a train that suddenly came to a stop. As I looked out the window, I saw a sign with his name on it. On another occasion, I was wandering through unfamiliar streets, semi-lost, and mid-conversation about him with a friend, I turned a corner to find a business building with his surname on the sign above the door. That same week, I was in a car park when a vehicle pulled in right next to me, its registration plate bearing his surname. Later, I went to a restaurant, and as if on cue, the waiter began handing out flyers, with his face on them. His music seemed to follow me everywhere. Yes, he was a well-known musician, and it wasn't unusual for his songs to be played on the radio. But the timing was uncanny. I'd step into a shop, and one of his songs would be playing. I'd leave, enter another shop, and another one of his tracks would come on. The strangest moment was when I was thinking about his passing. Just as I entered a shop, one of his final songs, one strongly associated with his death, began playing. I had never heard it on the radio before. The most bizarre coincidence happened while Aaron, Celia, and I were on a road trip. We had been listening to his music the entire way, and as we drove past the very place where our historical figure had been killed, my friend put on one of his CDs. The song that began playing contained lyrics referencing that exact historical event. We found it amusing at the time, joking that he was teasing us from beyond. I might have brushed it off if not for everything else that had been happening, including a passage I later found in a book about him where someone remarked how much he resembled that very historical figure. But the oddities didn't stop there. Back at Aaron's house, we spent the evening watching videos of him, laughing at his performances, completely immersed in our little world of admiration. My other friend Poppy, who wasn't as obsessed as we were, filmed a short clip of us giggling at one of his performances. Suddenly, she gasped, saying she had caught something strange on camera. We assumed she was being overdramatic. It was probably just dust. But when we looked, it wasn't. Small, glowing orbs of light darted around behind us, bouncing in the air. Then, as one floated past a mirror, I saw its reflection. This wasn't just something captured on film. I could see them with my own eyes. Celia must have seen them too because she pointed at one and gasped. Later that night, Aaron went to bed while Celia, Poppy, and I stayed downstairs discussing what we had seen. As we talked, I suddenly felt an intense warmth settle over my shoulders. It was odd, like someone wrapping their arms around me from behind. I ignored it at first, until Celia suddenly spoke up. "Does anyone else feel really hot across their shoulders?" I turned to her in shock. "Yes. It feels like a hug." Then, without thinking, she added, "For some reason, I feel like it's him." And so were the lights. I had to admit, she wasn't wrong. He had been known for hugging people from behind. The thought sent a shiver through me, despite the warmth. Over the next few weeks, the same warmth returned several times. Once, I woke from a dream about him, burning up despite having no sheets on me. Half asleep, I jokingly murmured, "Not now, his name, I'm sleeping." The warmth instantly faded. Another time, Celia and I visited his former homes, hoping to experience something. We felt nothing while standing outside, which disappointed us. But later, while sitting in a pub, someone at another table casually mentioned the name of a living musician who had been close to him. Instantly, the warmth returned. Celia gasped, claiming she felt it too. Was she just mirroring my reaction, or had she truly experienced it? I wanted to believe she was being honest. The third time, I was watching a music DVD alone. That's when something truly unexplainable happened. A sudden poke on my upper arm. Then, the same warmth spread across my shoulders. I hesitated, then quietly whispered, "If this is you, touch my leg." A moment later, I felt a gentle tug on my tights, pulling them slightly before releasing with a soft snap against my skin. I sat frozen, heart pounding. But the strangest experience of all happened when Celia and I were in separate homes. We had planned to sync up and watch one of his concert DVDs at the same time. As I inserted the disc, my TV started glitching. The screen flickered, and the DVD wouldn't play. Frustrated, I switched to my laptop instead, but the moment I pressed play, my laptop shut itself off. Meanwhile, Celia was messaging me, asking what had happened, when suddenly, her computer screen kept going blank. When my laptop rebooted, it automatically restored my open tabs. But among them, a YouTube video had popped up, playing the exact song I had been trying to watch. I had never searched for that video. The experiences continued for a while, but then, gradually, they faded. It's been 3 years now, and nothing like that has happened since. Rationally, I tell myself that I was simply noticing coincidences more because I was obsessed with him at the time. My brain was wired to recognize his name, his songs, his image, so it only felt like he was appearing more frequently. And yet, if that were true, why doesn't it happen anymore? I'm still just as fascinated by him. I still listen to his music, watch his videos, and read about his life. But those eerie moments, the warmth, the lights, the strange electrical disturbances, are gone. The further in the past it gets, the harder it is to believe it happened at all. My mind keeps trying to rationalize it. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe Celia and I fed off each other's excitement. But then I look back at my journal from that time. I reread my words, written in the moment, filled with absolute certainty that something beyond coincidence was happening. And I wonder, did he really visit us? Or did he simply move on to visit other fans, leaving behind only memories and an unsolved mystery? My home has a friendly spirit that's lived with us for quite a while now. It's become quieter since the last time I did a cleansing, but it occasionally lets us know it's still around. Usually, its presence doesn't bother me. Instead, it acts almost like a gentle warning system, alerting me whenever something significant is about to happen. One particular experience started when I began noticing some odd things around the house. It was late at night, and I felt the downstairs patio door sliding open. My bedroom is right above the dining room, where the patio door is, so I could clearly feel the vibrations of it sliding. Yet, whenever I checked, the door remained closed and locked. Immediately afterward, I'd hear familiar footsteps moving through the hallway and into my room. This happened a few times, and each occurrence left me puzzled. At first, I couldn't figure out why the spirit had become active again. Soon enough, my kids started falling ill, one after another. One would recover, and the next would catch the flu. I found myself cleaning and sanitizing everything over and over again. It was exhausting. Looking back, I realized the spirit was probably trying to warn me that something was about to happen. After noting all this down in my activity journal, I put it away and didn't think much of it again for a while. 2 weeks later, I began experiencing unusual anxiety. For no apparent reason, I became extremely cautious about security around the house, double-checking doors, windows, and even being extra vigilant when taking my dog out at night or walking my kids to the bus stop. Around this time, I started randomly thinking about my husband's cousin, whom we hadn't seen or talked to in quite a while. His memory just kept popping into my head. One evening, my husband and I came home after grabbing dinner. For some reason, we began discussing his cousin out of nowhere. While talking about him, a strange, unsettling feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't exactly panic. It was calmer but heavier. Suddenly, my husband's phone rang. It was his uncle, delivering heartbreaking news. His cousin had been shot. The news shook us deeply. His cousin had been involved in a confrontation with a neighbor and had been shot in the chest. Sadly, despite everyone's efforts, he didn't survive. When my husband received the news, I wasn't completely surprised. Somehow, I had known something bad had happened to him. It was around the same time that activity at home increased again. Footsteps returned, doors vibrated, and odd sounds filled the house. One night, while lying in bed, I distinctly felt a single finger poking my shoulder. Another night, something gently pulled down my covers from my feet, not once, but 3 times. After the 3rd time, I finally asked it firmly to stop, and it did. Around that same period, I started experiencing minor disturbances that seemed unrelated at first: headaches, restless nights, and unexplained anxiety. Yet I didn't feel threatened, just unsettled. Then, shortly after, I discovered our beloved puppy was very ill. One morning, I found him covered in his own vomit and diarrhea. We rushed him to the vet and found out he had contracted a severe stomach virus. Thankfully, the vet gave us good advice and proper medication, and after careful treatment, our puppy recovered fully. Reflecting back on all these events, it became clear that the spirit in our home wasn't there to scare us or hurt anyone. Instead, it seemed to be trying its best to get our attention and warn us about impending trouble. It never felt malicious, just persistent, quietly protective, and determined to communicate. Since these experiences, I've become much more aware of our resident spirit's subtle messages. It's comforting to know that, despite the unusual nature of its presence, it has always tried to look out for us. I continue to document these events, observing carefully to ensure that we remain alert and ready to act whenever something unusual arises. Our spirit remains with us, peaceful but watchful, a unique and unexplainable member of our family. When I was 10 years old, my family moved into a new house in late 1991. We stayed there until my mother moved out in 2007. Throughout that entire period, I encountered someone we began referring to as the dancer. This wasn't someone I knew personally, just a man we would see regularly walking past our house. At first, it seemed completely normal. We'd notice him maybe once a day or every few days, usually between 6 and 7 in the evening. This man always wore a black or charcoal-colored suit, a white shirt underneath, carried a briefcase, and seemed to wear glasses. He wasn't very tall, maybe around 5 feet 4 inches, with thick sandy blonde hair. He had a very brisk, purposeful walk. Initially, nothing about him seemed odd at all. But one day, probably in the summer of 1991 or early 1992, I was playing with our pet Budgie and glanced out the window, seeing him walk past again. It was an extremely hot day, and it suddenly struck me as strange that this man was always dressed in a full suit despite the heat. I wondered how anyone could comfortably walk at that speed, dressed in formal attire, in such intense heat. Years passed, and we continued seeing him frequently, always walking quickly, always in his charcoal or black suit, white shirt, carrying a briefcase, and wearing glasses. The most consistent detail was his hurried pace. It never slowed, regardless of weather or season. In 1999, my mother and I were outside late at night, standing a few houses down from ours, looking up at the stars. We usually saw him passing by our home, but this time, we saw him at a distance, turning onto another street. My mother remarked she'd never seen exactly where he went beyond our house. She expressed concern about him walking home late from the train station, given that there were sometimes troublemakers around at night. It occurred to me then that despite seeing him so frequently, none of us had ever observed him in any other context. We didn't know where he lived, where he was coming from exactly, or what he did. He was simply always there, walking by. About a year later, I had my first and only direct interaction with him. I was standing close to our driveway, near the sidewalk, when he passed by. I said hi instinctively, and he briefly glanced at me and quietly said hi back. There was something off about that exchange, something felt strange, though I couldn't identify what exactly. I got distracted by a catalog in the mailbox, looked up again just moments later, and he was completely gone. This struck me as extremely odd. Our embankment was steep and filled with dense shrubs. The neighbors had similarly dense bushes. The houses across the street had clearly visible yards. There was nowhere he could have disappeared so quickly. Despite this bizarre event, I wasn't scared, just curious. I wondered if anyone else in the neighborhood had ever noticed anything unusual about him. We continued seeing him regularly after that, at various points along the path from the nearby train station toward our house. Still, there was something unsettling about his appearances, something none of us could quite figure out. Interestingly, though we often saw him on his regular route, I realized much later that I'd never actually seen him cross a street. He always seemed to cross at the same hidden point, obscured by a thick cluster of lily-pilly trees near our house. We had a mini forest of these bushes that made it impossible to see exactly where he crossed. A separate occasion stood out vividly. I was hanging out with friends as teenagers do, loitering outside the Masonic Lodge, directly across from the train station. We were joking and speculating about conspiracies behind the lodge gates, just entertaining ourselves. While there, I spotted the same man walking swiftly through the station parking lot. It was the closest I'd ever seen him to the station itself, but he was walking away from it, heading in the direction of his usual route past our house. It didn't seem strange at the moment because it was consistent with his normal path. However, it later struck me that I had never seen him at the actual station or on any part of his route before the station. Each encounter was always somewhere along that same path, always after he'd already left the station area. Over time, sightings of the dancer became so routine that they almost stopped registering with us. We'd casually remark, "There he goes again," but we stopped actively wondering about him. However, after the incident where he vanished from sight so abruptly, something about his presence felt more unsettling, more mysterious. I began to question what he was really doing, where he came from, and why he never seemed to change. His clothes were always the same, his pace consistently fast, and he never showed signs of aging or changing over the years. It seemed improbable that anyone could maintain the same routine so precisely for more than a decade without any noticeable change. Thinking back now, it's strange how vividly I remember the first time I saw him walking past our house. It was just a mundane moment, nothing exciting or alarming. Yet somehow, it stuck with me. Maybe part of the reason it stayed was the persistent, nagging question of who this man was, what he was doing, and why we only saw him under those specific circumstances. My curiosity deepened after realizing no one had ever seen him deviate from his established path, nor had anyone ever witnessed him engaging in normal everyday activities. No stops at stores, no interactions with other people, nothing beyond his constant, purposeful stride. Now, years after moving out of that house, I occasionally wonder what the dancer was. Was he just a regular man who had a peculiar, obsessive routine? Or was he something else, something beyond normal explanation? My logical side wants to believe he was just an odd neighbor with very consistent habits. But another part of me wonders if perhaps he was something more mysterious, maybe a residual energy, or an apparition stuck repeating the same loop endlessly. I still don't have any concrete answers. Maybe he was a ghost trapped in a loop, replaying the same routine day after day, year after year. Or maybe, as mundane as it sounds, he really was just an odd man with an even odder routine. Either way, the dancer has remained a vivid memory from my childhood, something I still can't fully explain. In late 2006, I completed my service in the U.S. Army. Being young and eager to reconnect with my family, something I hadn't been able to do for several years, I decided to move back to Massachusetts. My mother warmly suggested I stay with her temporarily until I secured steady employment and savings. At first, I was hesitant, but she convinced me that the renovated third floor of her house would be ideal for me. By October 2006, I had settled into my mother's home. My brother and sister also lived on the third floor, which didn't bother me in the slightest. However, something about the house always felt a little strange. I'd visited once before when my mother initially moved in, and even then, an odd sensation lingered in the air, though I dismissed it easily at the time. Early November marked my first unsettling experience. I was standing at the bathroom sink shaving, when suddenly I lost track of time. I have no memory of what transpired, but when I snapped back to reality, the shaving cream had started drying on my face. Confused, I stepped out of the bathroom, only for my brother to scowl at me jokingly. "An hour? I thought army guys were supposed to be quick." I laughed until I glanced at the clock and realized he wasn't exaggerating. An entire hour had vanished without explanation. Being skeptical, I brushed it off, though it left me puzzled. Just 3 nights later, around 10:30 p.m., I was again in the bathroom when I distinctly heard footsteps outside. Alarmed, I peered under the door and saw what appeared to be 2 shadows of legs. Knowing I should be alone in the house for another 3 hours, I flung open the bathroom door swiftly, prepared to confront an intruder. But there was nobody there. Grabbing a baseball bat, I methodically searched every room, my heartbeat thumping in my ears. Yet, every window and door was securely locked, and I found nothing. I attributed the sounds to nerves or the quirks of an old house. The following day, a more startling event occurred. My mother was upstairs gathering laundry when suddenly, my brother and I heard a loud slam. Moments later, my mother stormed downstairs angrily, shouting about my brother Carl slamming his door in her face. Carl was confused. He hadn't done anything. Curious, I suggested perhaps a draft caused it, but upon inspection, we found Carl's bedroom window shut tight, securely locked against the Massachusetts winter. Though I tried rationalizing these strange events, the tension in the house was slowly mounting. Every day after, mysterious sounds, shadows moving swiftly in my peripheral vision, knocking on walls, and footsteps pacing empty hallways, continued to unsettle us. Still skeptical, I attempted to convince myself everything was normal. Things escalated dramatically one night in mid-December. At 3 a.m., I awoke abruptly to my brother yelling in panic. He was frantic, packing a bag and insisting he couldn't stay there another minute. After helping him outside, I urged him to explain what happened. Shaking, he described waking up to the sound of rustling, initially thinking it was our dog. Turning over, he witnessed a naked figure dart through his room and vanish into the wall. More terrifyingly, he claimed a grotesque, monstrous creature was chasing the figure, crab walking behind it in an unnatural and horrifying manner. Convinced it wasn't sleep paralysis due to his immediate reaction, he vowed never to enter the house again, and he kept his word. A week later, Christmas celebrations were held at my aunt's home to avoid the oppressive atmosphere of our house. Shortly after Christmas, another disturbing sighting took place. My mother and I were relaxing, watching television in the late morning. Suddenly, my attention was drawn to the doorway. Standing there was a towering figure cloaked entirely in darkness, blocking the sunlight and filling the entire frame with its imposing presence. When I blinked, it vanished. My mother's startled voice broke the silence. "Did you see that?" confirming my vision. With panic rising, I quickly took her pistol and searched every corner of the house again, finding nothing. Afterward, we compared descriptions and were stunned that our observations matched perfectly. It was an overwhelming confirmation that something genuinely unsettling resided with us. The paranormal activity intensified, becoming a constant source of anxiety. It felt as if the house itself resented our presence, relentlessly tormenting us with shadowy figures and eerie whispers. One particularly terrifying night, as I lay in bed facing my window lit by a nearby street lamp, faint whispers filled my ears, chilling me to my core. Then, in a shocking escalation, the whispers grew louder, directly beside my bed. Terrified but defiant, I shouted for whatever it was to leave my room immediately. A thunderous crash echoed through the bedroom in response. Jumping out of bed, heart pounding, I switched on the lights to find a softball-sized hole punched into the wall just above my cable box. Whatever presence haunted the house had made its anger known. It was the final straw for me. I could no longer rationalize these incidents away. After that night, I knew it was time to leave. I moved out shortly afterward, unable to stay in that house any longer. The experience deeply affected me, instilling an unease that lingered for years. The house was eventually sold, passing through multiple owners in a short period. My mother later revealed she'd replaced the carpets after my departure, perhaps in an attempt to erase the memories. Still, she admitted the unsettling events had left a lasting impression on her as well. Years later, even driving past the house stirs deep anxiety in me. I learned that my brother never returned after that terrifying night, deeply scarred by the experience. Perhaps someday, someone might uncover what truly resides there. But as for me, I have no desire to ever set foot inside again, haunted by memories of lost hours, shadowy figures, and unexplainable phenomena that defy rational explanation. It was sometime around 2003 or 2004. I can't remember the exact year, but I was in my third year of high school when everything started. We lived in a city in Cebu, one of those places where urban and rural life seemed to blend together. Our house was near the business district, yet it still had that quiet, provincial atmosphere. My parents had built our home on land owned by my mother's ancestors, right next to the old ancestral house that had been standing since the Spanish era. The house had been renovated over the years, but its history remained intact, passed down through generations. Beside the ancestral home stood the only surviving tree in our compound. It was massive, ancient, and impossible to cut down. According to the elders in our family, elemental spirits lived in that tree, and to harm it would bring misfortune. Growing up, I loved hearing the ghost stories tied to our ancestral home and that tree. Some were frightening, others downright bizarre. Stories of a white lady floating past the windows, the sound of a pig wearing bakya, traditional wooden slippers, roaming the second floor, a shadowy man smoking a cigar up in the tree, and even whispers of a sigbin, a mythical creature from Filipino folklore. These stories never scared me. If anything, I enjoyed them. I never believed in spirits, until the night something started calling my name. It was past midnight when I first heard it. A woman's voice, soft, melodic, almost hypnotic, whispered my name. Amelia. Amelia, come outside. I was already asleep when I heard it, but somehow, I stirred awake. Her voice wasn't urgent, wasn't threatening. It was alluring, like a song I wanted to keep listening to. Without thinking, I got up and walked toward the back door of our house. And that's where the real danger lay. Our back door didn't lead to a yard or a simple pathway. It led directly to the edge of a dike, a steep, 10-foot drop into a canal below. Years ago, that canal had been a small river leading out to sea, but over time, it had changed. The dike acted as a barrier between our house and the water. If I had opened that door and stepped forward, I would have fallen straight down. But I didn't open the door. At least I don't think I did. The next morning, I woke up somewhere strange. I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't even in the living room where I usually slept with my family. I was under the dining table, curled up on the floor. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe I had just sleepwalked. I wasn't alarmed. It was strange, yes, but I didn't think much of it. Until it happened again. Night after night, the same voice would call me. I would wake up, or half wake up, and find myself walking toward the back door. Every morning, I would wake up under the dining table. And yet I never told my parents. I should have. But I didn't think it was serious. I had never sleepwalked before in my life, but I convinced myself it was just a phase. Then, the dream started. I found myself on a beach, the sand cool beneath my feet, collecting seashells along the shore. The water was calm, the sky a dull gray, and in the distance, I saw a lighthouse standing alone in the sea. A narrow, cemented path stretched from the beach to the lighthouse, like a bridge over the water. And there, standing at the lighthouse, was a man. He was dressed in white, though his face was obscured. He lifted his hand, beckoning me. Every night, I had the same dream. And every morning, I woke up under the dining table. At first, I wasn't afraid. If anything, I was curious. Each time I dreamed of the lighthouse, the man seemed to get closer. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I felt drawn to him. Maybe it was my teenage hormones, but I started looking forward to the dream, eager to finally see him up close. Then, one night I did. I was walking along the shore again, picking up seashells, when suddenly, he was there, standing right in front of me. And his face, it was the face of my high school crush. I woke up in a panic, shaking, breathless. For the first time, I was afraid. Why was this figure using my crush's face? Why did he keep beckoning me? And why did I wake up under the dining table every single time? Fear crept into my days. I started struggling at school. I was constantly exhausted, my body growing weaker with each passing night. Then, something even stranger began happening. I started passing out. I would be in the middle of a conversation with my friends, or listening to a teacher's lecture, or even eating, when suddenly, nothing. I would black out. And when I woke up, my classmates would be gathered around me, panicked, asking if I was sick. But I wasn't sick. I felt fine. At least I thought I did. That night, the voice came again. Amelia! Amelia, come outside! I got up, half-conscious, and walked to the back door. My fingers fumbled at the lock, trying to undo it. Now, let me explain something about that door. It was nearly impossible to open. It had a heavy, rusted lock that only my father could budge, and even he had to use all his strength. None of us kids had ever been able to open it. It was just too difficult. But that night, when my mother found me under the dining table, something was different. I was holding a toothbrush, my mouth full of toothpaste. And the back door? The lock was nearly undone. Just a few more turns, and it would have opened completely. My father was the first to notice. He was shaken. Who tried to open the door? He asked. Only I knew the answer. And suddenly it hit me. What would have happened if I had managed to open it? What would have happened if I had stepped outside onto the dike? I finally told my parents everything, the voice, the dreams, waking up under the table, the exhaustion, the blackouts. They were horrified. My mother immediately called for help. An albulario, a local shaman, was brought in. After listening to my story, he went straight to the back door and muttered something under his breath. Then, he turned to my parents. She's being called. By who? My mother asked. By something from the water. The albulario performed a ritual, burning herbs, whispering prayers. He told my parents to place salt near the doors and windows and to keep a light on at night. If she answers the call one more time, he warned, she might not wake up again. I never heard the voice after that. The dream stopped. I stopped waking up under the dining table. But to this day, I wonder, who or what was waiting for me at that lighthouse? One night, a buddy and I were assigned guard duty at the side stairs of the barracks where we slept. These stairs weren't used much since they were actually the emergency exits, but it was our job to make sure no unauthorized personnel entered or left through those doors. My buddy sat at the bottom of the stairs while I took position at the landing between the first and second floor. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the second and third floor doors. To pass the time, we talked about our hometowns, random stories, and whatever else helped to make the night go by faster. It was quiet, just the two of us, and the occasional echo of distant voices from other guards on duty elsewhere in the building. Then something moved. It was subtle, just a flicker of movement from the third floor landing. I turned my head and focused, but I couldn't make anything out. Still, the feeling lingered, that sense of something just out of sight. I stood up, climbed the stairs to get a better look, and turned the corner to see the third floor door. Nothing. Shaking it off, I went back to my spot and resumed our conversation, pushing the odd moment to the back of my mind. But then, it happened again. This time, when I climbed the stairs, a familiar sensation swept over me, goosebumps prickling up my arms and down my neck, my heartbeat quickening for no apparent reason. It was the same reaction I always had when something not quite human was nearby. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to turn and walk back to my post. My buddy, sitting below me, had been watching. "Why do you keep getting up?" she asked. I hesitated, then told her the truth. "I keep seeing movement at the third floor landing, but when I check, there's nothing there." The moment the words left my mouth, her face changed. Her usual warm complexion went ashen, and she started murmuring, "Oh my God! Oh Jesus!" over and over, like a prayer. I frowned. "What's wrong?" She looked up at me, eyes wide with fear, and told me a story she had heard. A female soldier had committed suicide on those very stairs, hanging herself with her PT shirt from the third floor railing. I felt a chill spread through me, but I couldn't let my buddy see that. She was already shaken, so I forced a small laugh, brushed it off, and told her it was probably just a story meant to scare recruits. I reassured her that our shift was almost over, and soon we'd be back in our bunks. But my night was far from over. Later, as I lay on my bunk, sleep came easily. Guard duty had drained me, and all I wanted was rest. Then I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. No noise, no sudden disturbance. Just an eerie stillness. I blinked a few times, adjusting to the dim light in the bay room. The doors at the entrance had large windows, allowing the fluorescent hallway light to cast a faint glow inside. And in front of those doors stood a girl. At first, I thought it was one of the other soldiers, maybe someone needing to use the bathroom. But something wasn't right. She wasn't moving, and I couldn't see her face. Even with the light from the hallway, her features were completely obscured. She was nothing but a dark silhouette, standing perfectly still. From my bunk, I had a clear diagonal view of her. I should have been able to see the side of her face, the details of her body, anything. But she was a solid black shape, like a shadow that had somehow taken on form. Then, I noticed something even stranger. She wasn't casting a shadow on the floor. The light from the hallway was bright enough that any normal person standing there would have had a shadow stretching in front of them. But there was nothing. I wanted to dismiss it, tell myself my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But then she moved. One moment she was at the door. The next, she was at the foot of my bed. I hadn't seen her step forward. She was just there. I stared at her, my breath caught in my throat. She had what looked like a messy bun tied at the top of her head, the only detail I could make out. I couldn't see her eyes, her mouth, anything that made her human. But I knew, without a doubt, she was a woman. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was just half asleep. But when I opened them again, she hadn't disappeared. She was still standing there. And she was watching me. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding, and forced myself to speak. "What do you want?" "Nothing." She didn't move. Didn't react. Didn't answer. I was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to be afraid. I sighed and shook my head. "I'm tired," I muttered. "I need to sleep." And just like that, she vanished. The air felt lighter, as if something unseen had lifted. I lay back down, forcing my mind to let go of the fear, the confusion, and let sleep take over again. The next morning, as I was getting ready for the day, one of my other bunkmates approached me. "Do you sleep talk?" she asked casually. I frowned. "No, why?" She hesitated, looking slightly unnerved. "Because last night I saw you sitting up in bed talking, like you were having a conversation with someone. But I couldn't hear what you were saying." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. I hadn't been dreaming. And I hadn't been talking to myself. I had been talking to her. The first time I visited Canyon de Chelly, I explored a few overlooks along the north rim. The moment I stepped out of my vehicle, a heavy, suffocating feeling settled over me. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was worse. It was despair, something deep and overwhelming, a sensation I couldn't shake no matter how much I tried to ignore it. Each time I moved to a new overlook, the feeling followed, pressing down on my chest. I didn't understand why I felt that way. I only knew I wanted to leave. I drove over to the south rim, and the change was immediate. The oppressive weight lifted. I could breathe again. There was no longer an unseen force crushing me, no whispers of sadness lurking at the edge of my thoughts. I felt relief, like I had stepped out of something dark and unknowable into the light. That night, I camped at the designated campground with my dog, Pilar. I was sitting at the picnic table, writing in my journal by lantern light, when Pilar suddenly pulled on her leash, jerking my wrist toward the car. She was uneasy, her ears flattened, her body tense. I patted her, trying to soothe her, and she settled beside me again. But moments later, she did it again, stronger this time, her entire body pulling toward the car. I felt it too. Something wasn't right. I didn't argue with my instincts. I grabbed my things and locked myself and Pilar inside the car for the night. And after that, I swore I would never return to that place. Years passed, and I found myself on another camping trip with friends. We had planned a route through southeast Arizona, eventually heading toward Taos, New Mexico. One of them suggested stopping at Canyon de Chelly. I refused without hesitation. But then, something made me reconsider. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that I had run from something instead of facing it. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that the fear had been irrational. I told them I would go, but only if we did it differently this time. We would hire a guide, climb down into the canyon, camp there overnight, and hike out the next day. We made the arrangements. That night, as we sat by the fire in the canyon, I asked our guide about the history of the place. That was when I learned something I had never realized before. The North Rim and the South Rim weren't the same canyon. The North Rim was called Canyon del Muerto. The South Rim was Canyon de Chelly. It was in the north that Kit Carson and his men had carried out a massacre against the Navajo. The survivors had escaped into the south. I felt cold all over. The guide explained that the campground, the same one where I had felt so uneasy years ago, was where Kit Carson's men had been buried. Everything suddenly made sense. When we hiked out of the canyon, I decided to stay at the same campground again. I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle it. But when night fell, the unease returned. I slept in my car again. Some places, I realized, don't forget what happened to them. Not long after, I was at a powwow in Oklahoma with my boyfriend, Rob. We camped on the reservation, and the first night passed without incident. But on the second night, something happened. I was lying in the tent when a man appeared beside me. I wasn't dreaming. It felt real, like something beyond sleep. He reached for my hand, his grip firm but not forceful, and started to pull me toward him. "Come with me," he said. I resisted, trying to pull away. "I'm here with Rob," I told him. "I won't go." He kept pulling, his voice calm, steady, almost hypnotic. I tried again to break free, but his grip tightened. It wasn't until I wrenched my arm back with all my strength and wrapped it around Rob that the figure disappeared. The next morning, I told Rob what had happened. His face went pale. The night before, he had experienced something too, But for him, it had been a woman. She had come to him, trying to lure him away, whispering, touching him, pressing kisses along his skin. And then, at some point, she had looked up at him, and she had become a man. Neither of us knew what to make of it. Some time later, I took another solo trip, traveling first to Chaco Canyon before heading toward Window Rock for the Navajo Nation Fair. I had originally planned to camp near Window Rock, but at the last minute, I changed my mind. I had avoided the Canyon de Chelly campground long enough. It was time to face it. I arrived just before dusk. This time, I forced myself to walk the campground, to take in the space instead of retreating into my car. That was when I came across a woman setting up camp. She was alone, on her very first solo trip. I stared at her, realizing how ridiculous it was that I, someone who had traveled and camped alone for years, still couldn't bring myself to sleep in a tent here. I set up my tent after dark, wrote in my journal for a while, then forced myself to lie down and tried to sleep. Sometime in the night, I woke to a familiar presence. The same man from the powwow. I could feel him there, just as Rob had felt the woman. I didn't panic. I didn't fall for whatever trick he was trying to play. Instead, I said out loud, "Oh, please. You can't do better than that. I know how this goes." The moment the words left my mouth, he was gone. I fell back asleep. Later in the night, something else woke me. An urgency. I never need to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. Never. But that night I did. I grabbed a dim headlamp and made my way to the restroom, not bothering to turn on the main light. I didn't want to wake other campers. The moment I sat down, the door to the bathroom swung open. And then it slammed shut. Before I could react, both stall doors beside me did the same. One after the other. Hard. I froze. There was no way a person could have moved that fast. No way they could have slammed both doors when they wouldn't have even known where they were in the dark. And then I heard it. Water. A sound I can only describe as a rush, an unearthly, gushing flow pouring into both stalls beside me. It didn't sound like someone urinating. I have heard women using restrooms my entire life. This was different. It was unnatural. I bent down, my heart pounding, and looked under both stalls. No feet. No one was there. I finished quickly, washed my hands, and walked back to my tent. As I unzipped the flap, I muttered, "Well, you got me there. That was better." No one ever exited the bathroom after me. The lights never turned on. And yet I finally slept soundly in my tent that night. When I was about 6 years old, my family moved into a 5-bedroom house in South Omaha, Nebraska. The neighborhood wasn't the best, sketchy, to say the least, but the rent was cheap, and the house was big enough for all of us. My parents didn't have many options, so despite the area's reputation, it became our home. The house itself was old, and from the very beginning, something about it felt different. Before I get into the strange things that happened, I want to describe the layout so you can picture it the way I remember. The house sat atop a steep hill, and a short set of stairs led up to a porch that had been painted purple at some point. When you walked through the front door, you entered the living room. Directly ahead was an entrance to the kitchen and a staircase that led upstairs. If you turned left from the living room, there was a hallway leading to 4 of the bedrooms and a bathroom. The upstairs was unique. It had only 1 bedroom, and an open space that we later used as a second family room. Eventually, my aunt came to live with us, and the upstairs became her space. But before she moved in, that bedroom was my playroom. And that's where things really started. The house wasn't empty. There were 3 spirits that seemed to reside there, a man in the basement, an elderly woman at the top of the stairs, and a little girl named Sarah. The man in the basement was the one I had the least interaction with. I rarely had any reason to go down there, but when I did, I always felt a heavy presence, like I was intruding. My mom believed that when he was alive, possibly decades ago, maybe even back when the house was part of a plantation, he had used the basement as a workshop. The air always smelled of wood, sawdust, and old earth, as if time had frozen around whatever work he had once done. He was never aggressive, but the message was clear. The basement was his space. The elderly woman, however, was another story. She was always in the same place, sitting at the top of the stairs, facing a window. I don't know why she stayed there or what she was watching for, but she never left that spot. The only time I ever interacted with her directly was one night when I was still using the upstairs bedroom as my playroom. I had asked my mom if I could have a sleepover in there. I wasn't sure why I wanted to. Something about it just felt like an adventure. I guess I was a weird kid. My mom agreed, tucking me into my sleeping bag before heading to the family room just down the hall. I was lying there, trying to sleep, when a strange feeling crept over me. It was the sensation of being watched. I brushed it off at first. I was used to getting nervous over nothing. But then I heard it. A woman's voice, soft, melodic, almost sing-song, calling my name. "Hannah, come here, baby." It sounded just like my mother. I immediately got up and went to her, expecting to see her waiting for me in the family room. But she wasn't. She was sitting there, looking confused. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You called me," I said. Her expression darkened. "No, I didn't." I insisted that I had heard her. I knew I had. But she just shook her head, telling me I must have imagined it. A cold feeling spread through me. I suddenly didn't want to sleep upstairs anymore. Then, there was Sarah. Sarah wasn't like the others. She wasn't an ominous presence lurking in the background, wasn't an entity I only caught glimpses of. She was a little girl, about 10 years old, and to me, she was a friend. I played with her all the time. I talked to her. At the time, I never questioned it. She was just there. I don't remember most of our conversations, but my mom does. She would see me running around the house, talking and laughing, and when she asked what I was doing, I would answer, "Oh, just playing with Sarah." She brushed it off as an imaginary friend. She would later realize that wasn't the case. One day, I was lying on my bed, watching the Disney Channel. My TV was at the foot of my bed, so I was stretched out on my stomach, fully immersed in my show. When I get focused on something, I tend to zone out completely, losing awareness of everything around me. That's why I didn't notice at first. But when the show cut to a commercial, and my mind surfaced from its trance, I realized something had changed. My light had been turned off. I knew it had been on when I started watching TV. I got up, went into the other room, and asked my mom or her husband if they had turned it off. They both denied it. My younger sister was too small to reach the light switch, and there was no one else in the house who could have done it. That was when my mom started to believe that maybe Sarah wasn't just in my head. When we were getting ready to move out, I asked if Sarah could come with us. My mom jokingly said, "Tell her to pack the light." I don't know if Sarah ever heard her, or if she even could. After we left, my mom became more curious about the house. She started researching its history, looking into any deaths that had happened nearby. That was when she found it. A little girl named Sarah had died in a car accident near our house. How she ended up attached to that house, why she stayed there, is something we still don't understand. Even now, years later, I still have dreams about her. I live in a small town in southern Arizona, right next to Tombstone. My family moved here when I was in middle school, and now I'm a freshman in college. That means I've been here for about 7 years. 6 years ago, my family bought a plot of land and had a construction company build our house from the ground up. Every detail of the house was handpicked by my mother. It was supposed to be perfect. We've been living in it for 5 years now. At first, everything was normal. The house was brand new, after all, no history, no past, nothing that could possibly carry any energy from before. But about a year in, I noticed something strange happening to my father. It started subtly. He had trouble sleeping. He would stay up late for no reason, almost as if he was avoiding going to bed. Then he started making odd requests, asking me to close the closet door and the bathroom door whenever I was in their room. At first, I thought it was just stress. Work, family responsibilities, things that could weigh on him over time. But as the months passed, his behavior only got worse. He was exhausted all the time, and it became obvious he was trying to avoid something. One day, after school, I asked him what was going on. I still remember how serious he was when he answered. He told me he had been having experiences. He would wake up in the middle of the night and see figures, 3 of them, standing in different corners of the bedroom, watching him. At first, I thought it was sleep paralysis, but then he described them in chilling detail. The first was a tall man, dressed in a 19th century suit and hat. His skin was pale, his hair dark, and he had a beard. The second was a Native American woman, older, with long dark braids. My father said she always looked sad. The third was a young boy, no older than 10, with blonde hair and 19th century clothing. Their eyes were dark, almost hollow. He wasn't sure if they were completely black or just sunken deep into their faces. He told me that while the man and the woman never really moved, never did much beyond standing there and staring, the boy was different. The boy liked the bathroom. And if the bathroom door was left open, the boy would always appear right beside my father when he woke up. The way my dad described it, the boy was the most unsettling presence of them all. So he made sure, every night, that the bathroom door stayed shut. There was one night, though, one night that he couldn't forget. It started with a sound. A banging from inside the bathroom. Then a child's voice, grunting with effort, as if struggling against something. Like it was trying to get out. The next morning, my mother and I burned sage and incense around the house. And after that, everything stopped. My father finally got some sleep. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. My mother and I hadn't experienced anything, and I assumed whatever had been happening was over. But then my younger sister started acting strangely. For privacy, I'll call her Zelda. At the time, she had just gotten her own room after years of sharing one with me. She was excited, thrilled, to have a space of her own. But after just a few nights, she came to me and asked if she could sleep in my room. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was still young, only 10, and it made sense that she might feel nervous sleeping alone. So I let her. But something about her room has always felt off. I don't think whatever is in there is connected to the figures my dad saw. This thing feels different. I don't like being in there at night. The room is colder than the rest of the house, darker even when the lights are on. It's hard to explain, but the air just feels heavier. Strange things happen in there. Sometimes we hear knocking sounds on the wall we share, even when no one is in her room. Her lamp and TV turn off by themselves. Her bedroom door locks randomly. And the closet. The closet door never stays closed. I know I've shut it before, only to find it open just a crack the next time I walk by. The worst night, though, was when I woke up to Zelda screaming. I ran to her room, my mother right behind me, and we found her hiding under the covers, shaking, her face wet with tears. And her ear was bleeding. It was the most terrified I had ever seen her. The next day, she refused to talk about it. It wasn't until I pressed her, over and over again, that she finally told me what happened. She had woken up in the middle of the night, around 3 a.m., and there was something standing in front of her closet. It wasn't human. It was tall, and possibly thin, its arms too long, its body unnatural. And it had no eyes. She couldn't move. She could barely breathe. With every blink, it got closer, like something out of a horror movie. Then, when it was inches from her face, its jaw unhinged and stretched wide, its mouth opening to impossible proportions. And then it screamed. Not a human scream. Something worse. A sound so loud and sharp it felt like it was tearing through her skull. That's when she started screaming, too. That's when we ran in. But by the time we got there, it was gone. That was a year ago. Since then, she has refused to sleep in that room. She's been staying in mine, and even though we're renovating her room now, I know she's dreading going back. To make her feel better, My parents let her keep incense in there and set up a small shrine to Buddha. So far, nothing else has happened. But I still don't trust that room. I still get uneasy when I pass it at night. And I still wonder, whatever was in there that night, whatever screamed at my sister, is it really gone? I was 10 years old when this happened. I had been sick with a virus I had caught from school, nothing serious, but enough to make me miserable. My parents had sent me to bed early to rest, though I wasn't tired. I had been lying in the dark for what felt like a long time, unable to sleep. It wasn't late yet. I could still hear my family downstairs, talking and watching television, their voices faint through the walls. To help you picture the scene, I'll describe my bedroom as it was that night. The head of my bed was positioned against the window, which overlooked our back garden and the gardens of the houses behind us. Across from me, at the foot of my bed, stood a tall wooden wardrobe with a thin, 3-foot mirror attached to one of its panels. It was either autumn or winter. I can't quite remember, but I do recall how early the nights fell. The sky had been dark for hours already. I preferred to sleep with my bedroom door closed and my curtains open, and that night was no exception. I was lying on my back, staring at my wardrobe in the darkness, when suddenly, without warning, a bright white light, something like a security light, flashed against it. The light wasn't coming from inside my room. It had an external quality, casting shadows in a way that suggested it was coming from outside. But what truly made my breath catch was what appeared within that light. A perfect black silhouette stood against my wardrobe door. It was so clear, so sharp, that for a moment I didn't even feel afraid, just puzzled. The figure was in profile, its side facing me, and though I couldn't tell if it was male or female, I could see its features well enough. It was petite, with short, curly hair, and the outlines of its nose and lips were distinct. The figure stood motionless, completely still, and I stared at it in shock for what felt like minutes, though in reality, it may have only been seconds. At first, I thought it was a neighbor. Maybe someone had turned on a light in their back garden and was standing outside, their shadow somehow cast through my window and onto my wardrobe. That seemed like the most logical explanation. But as the seconds passed, something felt off. I sat up slowly, then turned to look out the window behind me. Nothing. The gardens, both ours and our neighbors', were empty. There were no lights outside, no movement, no sign of anyone standing out there. The sky was overcast, no moonlight breaking through the clouds. The night was utterly still. A cold unease settled over me as I turned back toward my wardrobe. The silhouette was still there. But now, its head had tilted slightly downward. A chill ran through me. I had not seen it move, yet it had changed. It was observing me. Still clinging to logic, I turned to check outside one more time, leaning toward the window, searching for any possible explanation. But again, nothing. The world outside was pitch black. No streetlights reached the backyard, and our neighbors' houses remained dark. There was no source for the light. No reason for the shadow. I turned back once more, my heart hammering. The figure remained exactly where it had been, its posture unchanged. I watched it for what felt like forever, my mind racing, grasping for anything that could explain what I was seeing. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The light, the shadow, all of it vanished in an instant, as if someone had flicked off a switch. The darkness of my room returned, pressing in on me like a heavy weight. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the empty wardrobe door. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. There was something about the whole experience that unsettled me, not just because of what I saw, but because of how normal it all felt in the moment, like the figure belonged there. It didn't feel threatening, yet its presence defied all logic. I still wonder, who or what was standing in my room that night? I moved a lot as a child, living in many different houses, but only one place ever truly felt like home to me. It was there that I came to understand, without a doubt, that ghosts are real. My home was in a small Norwegian town called Heidel, nestled in a valley whose name, when directly translated, means Godfire Valley. It was a place rich with history, filled with old timber houses that had stood for generations. Living there felt like being in a living museum, where the past lingered in every creaking floorboard and every whisper of wind through the trees. On the same land, just next to our house, stood another home, my grandparents' house. The land itself had once been a farm, passed down through the family, and my father had lived in our house his entire life, just as my grandparents had in theirs. It was a place where history wasn't just something we read about, it was something we lived in. Growing up, death was never a hidden topic in my family. My parents and grandparents spoke about it openly, as a natural part of life. And, just as death was acknowledged, so were ghosts. It was never presented as something extraordinary or fictional, it was simply there, a part of our reality. Things would happen in our house, objects disappearing, voices being heard, figures glimpsed in the corners of rooms. But for years I only ever heard these stories from the adults. I had never experienced anything for myself. My grandmother had once lived in a house far more haunted than ours, and from those experiences she had developed certain rules she passed down to me. The first, and most important, was this. When something scares you, always try to find a logical reason for it. A natural explanation. Your imagination can be far scarier than reality if you don't stop to question it. Maybe that whisper at the window is just the wind. Maybe that shadow is just a trick of the light. For years I lived by that rule. Any time I thought I saw something strange, I reminded myself to find a reasonable explanation. And I always did. Until one night, when that rule was put to the ultimate test. I was 13 years old. My younger brother had gone to a friend's house for a sleepover, and my father had decided to visit one of his own friends. I wanted to stay home alone for the first time, and after some hesitation, my father finally agreed. I watched as the red tail lights of his car disappeared down the road, leaving me alone in the house. I had waited for this moment for so long. I was old enough to take care of myself, and now I had the freedom to do whatever I wanted, stay up late, watch whatever I wanted on TV, eat whatever I pleased. The night was mine. Our living room was on the second floor, with a small hallway leading into it. To the right of the hallway entrance, an old wood-burning oven stood against the wall. Across the far side of the living room, 3 large windows let in the cold, blue light of the evening. The only artificial light in the room came from a single lamp mounted above the couch where I sat. I had the TV on, watching Animal Planet. A documentary about meerkats was playing, the voices of the narrators filling the otherwise silent house. I felt completely at ease. Until I noticed something. In the corner of my eye, one of the windows, the middle one, had gone dark. Something was blocking the light. My first instinct was to remember my grandmother's rule. There's a logical explanation. It's probably just the shadow of a jacket hanging in the hallway. That made sense. I told myself not to look, not to react. I kept my eyes on the TV. But the shadow didn't move. A few more seconds passed, and my mind started analyzing it again. A jacket's shadow wouldn't block out that much light. It wouldn't stand perfectly still like that. And it wouldn't have such a defined shape. That was when I turned my head to look. And I saw it. A figure. A large, solid, human-shaped shadow. But it wasn't just a shadow, it had depth. It wasn't cast onto the window or the wall, it stood there, as if it had mass. It was darker than the night outside, a void so thick I couldn't see through it. The edges were unnaturally smooth, precise. I could make out every detail, the shape of a head, the curve of shoulders, the outline of arms. The only part one couldn't see was its legs from the knees down, as if they simply faded away. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. It didn't move either. But I felt it watching me. Seconds stretched into what felt like forever. My brain fought to rationalize it. Maybe it's a trick of the light. Maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. And just as I was about to turn my eyes back to the TV, it moved. Not the way a human moves. It twitched. A short, sharp, unnatural jerk. Its head snapped to the side, tilting downward in an almost mechanical motion. The sight of it made something deep inside me panic. A primal, instinctive fear. My body screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Just like that. The blue light returned to the window. The room was empty. I was alone again. I scrambled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. I called my father. When he picked up, I barely let him speak before I was blurting out what had happened, my words stumbling over each other. There was a man. In the living room. He just disappeared. For a few seconds, my father was completely silent. Then, in a voice too calm, too measured, he simply said, "I'm coming home." He didn't try to tell me it was my imagination. He didn't dismiss it. That was when I knew. I had seen what the adults had always spoken about. That night was only the beginning. From then on, I was aware of the presence in our home. And I believe it was aware of me too. It was almost as if, now that I had seen it, it no longer needed to hide from me. Like it had been waiting for me to be alone, so that, strange as it sounds, it could introduce itself properly. After all, it had been there for years. Living alongside me, in the same house. And maybe, just maybe, it felt like an introduction was long overdue. It all started when I was very young. My mother always called me an old soul because of the way I thought about things, how I analyzed the world, and how I spoke. She often told me stories of the strange things I had said as a child. One moment that always stood out was when I was 3 years old, rummaging through her closet. She had asked me what I was doing, and I had responded, "When you get to be as old as I am, you'll understand." Even years later, my mother confirmed that she remembered that moment exactly as I did. It wasn't a dream. But the most vivid part of my childhood wasn't just the strange things I said. It was the little boy I played with. I was convinced he was my imaginary friend, because that's what my family always told me. They dismissed him as a childhood fantasy, nothing more. But even as I grew older, I always knew he was real. What made it stranger was that, unlike other imaginary friends, he grew with me. Every year, just as I aged, so did he. He would visit me in my dreams when I got too old to play with him like I did when I was little. I never questioned why he was there. He was just a part of my life, always there to talk, to laugh, to comfort me in my hardest moments. He was even there in my nightmares, fighting alongside me when things got dark. He was my closest friend, my strongest protector, and my greatest secret. He had thick brown hair and hazel eyes, a warm color like honey. His crooked smile always made me feel safe, and his laugh was the kind of sound that could make everything feel okay again. Then, one day, he disappeared. The dream stopped. The feeling of his presence faded. I told myself it was because I was growing up, that I had finally let go of my childhood fantasy. But I couldn't shake the loneliness. I missed him, and I hated that part of me still wanted him to be there. Years later, after my grandmother passed away, she visited me in a dream. It was one of the most vivid dreams I've ever had, so real that even when I woke up, I could still feel it. In the dream, we were walking around the old schoolhouse that sat directly in front of her house. The air was warm, familiar, and I felt comforted by her presence. Then, suddenly, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind us. I turned toward my grandmother, and she was smiling. I followed her gaze, and there he was. A tall man, his hair darker than I remembered but still the same familiar shade of brown, his honey hazel eyes shining. He had grown up just as I had. I blinked, realization hitting me all at once. I knew him. I was so happy to see him that I didn't think to question why my grandmother was smiling at him as if she knew him, too. But when I asked her, her response confused me. "Yes, dear, I know him. And you will too soon." I thought I already did know him. I was about to ask her what she meant when I noticed what he was holding. A blanket, my baby blanket. Pale yellow, decorated with blue rocking horses and old-fashioned teddy bears. I recognized it immediately. I had kept it safe for years, tucked away as a cherished piece of my childhood. He draped it over my grandmother's shoulders and smiled at me, a knowing, almost bittersweet expression on his face. Then he said they had to go. I wanted to stop them, to ask him why he had my blanket, to ask my grandmother what she meant. But before I could say anything, they started walking down the hill toward the park. And as they turned the corner, their figures slowly faded away. I woke up. For days, the dream haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about the boy, about the way he had looked at me. Why had my grandmother said I would come to know him? I already knew him, didn't I? I waited night after night, hoping he would appear in my dreams again. When he finally did, I asked him his name. He just smiled, a little sadly. I was never given a name. That answer unsettled me more than I expected. I knew I had called him something when I was little, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember what it was. All of my imaginary friends had names. I had always made sure of it. So why didn't he have one? It wasn't long after that when everything clicked into place. One morning, I found my mother crying over a story she had read, something about a woman who had suffered a miscarriage. I asked her if she was okay, but I already knew the answer. Out of nowhere, almost as if she had been holding it in for years, she turned to me and said, "You're a rainbow baby, you know. I had a miscarriage right before I got pregnant with you." I froze. She went on, explaining how the baby had been around 3 months along when she lost it. She even sketched a little drawing of what it would have looked like at that stage, a small, peanut-shaped figure. I felt the world tilt. It was a sensation I had always associated with realizations, moments of undeniable truth. I asked her if she had known if it was a boy. She shook her head, saying they never found out. But when I pressed her on what she would have named the baby if it had been a boy, she admitted that she had liked the names Ian and Vincent. I wrote the names down and went straight to my room. And then I did the math. If the miscarriage had overlapped with my conception, if I had been born prematurely, or if circumstances had been even slightly different, if things had gone another way, maybe I wouldn't have made it. Maybe he would have. It was then that I knew. I knew my imaginary friend had never been imaginary at all. He had always been my brother. All the memories I had of him came rushing back. How I used to joke that if I wore my baseball cap just right, we almost looked the same. How I had declared that he was my brother, even when no one else believed me. How I had laughed when people told me he wasn't real. That night, he came to me in another dream. I was lying in bed when he appeared. He looked sad. I told him I was angry that my mother had never told me about him, angry that I had gone my whole life thinking I was alone. He sat next to me, listening quietly, his eyes full of understanding. Then he asked me, in the softest voice, "Did you find a name for me?" I took a deep breath. "Ian. Your name is Ian Vincent." A slow smile spread across his face. "I like it," he said. And then he was gone. But not really. Because now, I feel him in the little moments throughout my day. I know he's still with me. Just as he always has been. My grandmother had been right. I know him now. And I always will. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It happened in June of 2016, during my sophomore year of high school. I met a girl. I won't use her full name, so I'll just call her T. At the start of the school year, we became close. She started getting comfortable around me, and before I knew it, we were best friends. Over time, we got even closer, and soon, we realized we had feelings for each other. In May, we started dating. But just 3 weeks into the relationship, she told me we were better off as friends. So we broke up and went back to being best friends. I watched her fall for another guy, but I knew he wasn't interested in her. I tried to warn her, but she didn't listen. Eventually, she had her heart broken, and I was there for her. That's when she realized she still had feelings for me. We started talking about the idea of being together again, and we made a promise to each other. When the time was right, we would take the next step in our relationship. We had even set a date. Originally, we planned it for a Wednesday because I didn't have work that day, but at the last minute, she asked if we could move it to Thursday. I agreed without thinking much of it. But then Wednesday came, and she started acting strange. She didn't want to hang out. She ignored my texts. Something was off. When she finally did reply, she seemed upset, but she wouldn't tell me why. I tried to let it go, but that night I had a bad feeling. Something was wrong. The next day, when we met up, she seemed even more distant, like she was afraid to talk to me. I kept asking her what was wrong until she finally whispered, "Please don't leave me. I messed up. I broke my promise to you. I lost my virginity yesterday." My heart dropped. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to say. I felt sick, like the ground had been ripped from under me. But I loved her. No matter how much it hurt, I couldn't walk away. So I told her I forgave her. That day at work, I felt empty. My mind kept replaying what she said over and over. I kept whispering to myself, "I love her. I forgive her. I just wish she loved me the same way I love her." I must have said it 5 times before I heard it. A voice. "I'll help you keep her." I jumped, my blood turning cold. I was alone. My boss, the building super, was out for the day. I had been working in the apartment by myself. But when I turned around, I saw him. A man sat in the corner of the room, wearing a torn suit, his face covered in dirt. He was watching me. My body locked up in fear, but my desperation was stronger. I loved this girl. I didn't want to lose her. I just wanted her to love me the way I loved her. So instead of running, I sat down beside him. I listened. He told me he could make her realize she loved me. He told me he could fix everything. That summer, things started changing. T and I got close again. She started telling me she loved me, but only through text. I didn't know what this spirit was doing, but I knew he was doing something. Then, one day, I gave him permission. I let him into my body. I don't know what happened during those moments. I don't remember what he did. But when I came back to myself, she was holding on to me, sobbing. Through her tears, she was whispering, "Alan, I can never lose you. I never realized how much I love you. Please don't take Alan from me. I may not have known it until now, but he's the love of my life. I love Alan." And when she realized I was back in control, she kissed me over and over, holding on to me like she was afraid I'd disappear. That spirit changed everything. He gave me what I wanted. I still see him every day. And so does T. At first, it felt like a miracle. A gift. He had helped me win her heart. But then, things started to change. One night, I was dreaming about her when he woke me up. His voice was sharp, urgent. "She needs to go." At first, I didn't understand. I asked him what he meant, and he told me she had been telling people my secrets, twisting them, making it sound like I was haunted. I checked my phone. It was 4 a.m. Without thinking, I texted her. "It's over." The spirit wasn't satisfied. He wanted revenge, but I begged him not to hurt her. I didn't want that. But he insisted. Shortly after, she was diagnosed with depression. She still struggles with it to this day. Now I'm single. It's my senior year, and I want to focus on school. But the spirit doesn't like that. He gets angry when he sees me with other girls who aren't my girlfriend. He tells me I need someone. And sometimes, I wonder if he's right. I grew up in a small, quiet village in the heart of Norway, Heidel. There wasn't much to do as a 14-year-old girl. No malls, no big city attractions. My entertainment was simple: climbing trees, visiting friends, building tree houses, or going for walks. I didn't have much in the way of technology, so I found joy in small things. Walking was my favorite. It gave me time to myself, away from my brothers. Being the only girl in the family, I needed those moments of solitude. I'd take long walks along the road, my Discman clipped to my belt, and listen to the only CD I owned. I never had to worry about anyone hearing me sing. If someone appeared, they'd either be in a car or walking far enough away that I had plenty of time to stop and act normal before they got close. One afternoon in July, the weather was perfect. The sun was warm, a gentle breeze made the trees sway, and the sky stretched blue and cloudless. Maybe it was the beautiful day, or maybe it was Shania Twain's voice in my ears, but I got lost in thought and suddenly realized how far I had walked. Just ahead was the part of the road I never walked alone, the place where the trees grew thick on both sides, where the light barely touched the ground. It was darker there, eerier. My great-grandfather once encountered a dangerous animal in those woods. I couldn't remember if it was a wolf or a bear, but either way, it was enough to make me wary. I stood at the edge of that place, staring down the path. My music was off now, and the only sounds were the wind in the leaves and distant birdsong. I imagined what could be lurking between the trees, hidden eyes watching me, waiting for me to take one step too far. I turned around and started walking back, picking up my pace. As I left the shadowed part of the road behind, I let myself relax. I turned my music back on, letting Shania Twain's voice fill my ears again. I was even brave enough to start singing along. I sang louder, bolder. I was sure I sounded terrible, but with no one around, who cared? I got lost in the music, repeating the song over and over. The more I sang, the better I thought I sounded. Then, something changed. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and a strange feeling settled in my chest. I wasn't alone. I glanced over my shoulder, quick and discreet. About 20 meters behind me, a man was walking. He was old, clearly from another time. His appearance was unusual. Something about him felt out of place, as if he didn't belong to this era. He was bald on top with a long, white beard reaching down to his chest. He wore a white sweater, dark gray pants held up by suspenders, and black, worn shoes. His posture was slightly hunched, his hands folded behind his back as he walked. He wasn't looking at me, just staring down at the road ahead of him. But the sight of him made my stomach twist. I had never seen him before. Not in the grocery store, not at the gas station, not anywhere in our small village. And I had walked this road almost every day for years. I should have seen him before. Embarrassment hit me like a wave. Had he been walking behind me the whole time? Had he heard me singing? I could only imagine how ridiculous I must have sounded. I stopped singing immediately and picked up my pace, though I tried not to make it obvious. The last thing I wanted was for him to think I was scared of him. After a while, I couldn't resist another glance back. The distance between us was exactly the same. That wasn't possible. I had sped up, but his slow, steady pace hadn't changed at all, yet somehow, he hadn't fallen behind. A chill ran through me. I turned forward again, forcing myself to stay calm. My driveway was just ahead. As soon as I reached the entrance to my home, I hurried a few steps down before turning around one last time. He was gone. The road stretched empty in both directions. There was nowhere he could have gone so quickly, no side paths, no houses nearby, just open space and trees. My heart pounded. Curious but uneasy, I took a few steps back toward the road, peering around. Maybe he had stepped behind a bush, hiding for some reason. Maybe he had walked faster than I thought. But no matter where I looked, he was nowhere to be seen. I turned and rushed inside, my mind racing. Later, I told my grandmother about what happened. Sitting in her old brown leather chair, I described everything, the singing, the strange feeling, the old man's appearance, and how he had vanished. The more I spoke, the more serious my grandmother looked. She didn't seem surprised. Instead, she told me that I wasn't the first person to see him. My great-grandfather had encountered the same man many, many years ago. A cold shiver ran down my spine as she began to tell me the story. It had been winter. My great-grandfather was walking home late one evening, carrying groceries from the village. Snow covered the ground, and darkness had already set in. At some point along the road, just like I had, he realized he wasn't alone. But unlike me, the man wasn't behind him. He was ahead. A figure walked slowly in the same direction, dragging a wooden sled behind him. There were no houses nearby, no reason for someone to be out there alone. My great-grandfather, thinking the old man might be a neighbor, called out to him. No response. He spoke again, louder this time, but still, the man didn't turn around. Determined to get his attention, my great-grandfather picked up his pace. But no matter how fast he walked, the distance between them never changed. It was as if the old man was always just out of reach. Eventually, my great-grandfather gave up and walked the rest of the way home in silence, watching the man slowly disappear into the darkness. The next morning, curious about the strange encounter, he stepped outside to check the road. The night had been still, no new snowfall. His own footprints from the previous night were there, clear and crisp in the snow. But the old man's tracks, the boots, the sled, were nowhere to be seen. The road was empty. I listened to my grandmother's words, my skin crawling. I had walked that road so many times, even after that day, but I never saw the man again. Sometimes, when I felt brave, I would take my bike and ride farther, past the place where my great-grandfather had seen him. I would stop and look around, imagining the stories my grandmother had told me. It was hard to believe that something so unsettling could happen in a place so quiet, so peaceful. But after that day, I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't been alone on that road. And neither had my great-grandfather.